Chapter 1. In East China's Shanghai. Shanghai. It used to be a city with a very large population and a very developed economy. Now it had become a dilapidated wasteland, with no signs of human habitation. Only a group of densely packed, slow-moving zombies were wandering slowly in the city. And at this time, in a certain building in this ruined city, a scene was playing out in a sealed room. There were no windows in the room, only a door. The door was locked, and there was only one bed in the room. Apart from this bed, there was nothing else. This was originally a secret lounge next to the office of the boss of a large company. There were no windows except for the door and the vent. In the room that should have been empty, there was a slight sound that made people's ears red and their hearts beat faster. However, on the bed inside there was a forced scene. However, no one expected that the forced one was the man who couldn't move below. An hour later, the woman walked out of the room with a satisfied look on her face. The woman didn't look bad, but the makeup on her face was too thick. Her lips were as red as blood, and there was a layer of white powder on her face. The eyeshadow on her eyelids was so coquettish that the original appearance of her eyes couldn't be seen. Her thick and long eyelashes drooped down and gently covered her eyes. She had a figure that would fascinate men and make women jealous. She was tall and curvy with a proud chest, a flexible waist, a round and perky butt, and a pair of straight and slender legs. Outside the room was an office. Originally, there were 3 people who stayed in the office to rest and be on guard. As soon as they saw her come out, they turned to look at her, and a trace of disgust flashed in their eyes. The woman walked out of the room with a smile on her face and said, "It's time to go." After saying that, she took out a gun and walked out of the door of the office first, leaning against the wall vigilantly and walking to the stairs. The 3 people behind her didn't say anything, and they all took out their guns and followed her out. However, the eyes of the 3 people secretly met behind the woman, and a hidden murderous intent flashed in their eyes. After the woman walked out of the room, a man was lying on the bed, unable to move. The man's face was very handsome, but at this time it was red. He had a straight nose bridge, thin lips that were pressed into a straight line, and a pair of long and narrow eyes that were bloodshot were staring at the ceiling with a strong killing intent. The expression on the man's face was ferocious as he gritted his teeth. His face was a mixture of anger and killing intent. If it wasn't for the fact that he couldn't find Ling Ling's location, he wouldn't have allowed her to do such a thing to him. However, not long after, the woman with so much makeup that her original face could not be seen was knocked out and thrown into the group of zombies. The zombies that gradually gathered immediately pounced on her body, biting and tearing. She woke up from the excruciating pain. "Ah, Lin Yong, Lu Hongshi, and Liang Ken, I won't let you off. I won't let you go even if I become a zombie. Ahahaha. Do you think I didn't guard against you?" The little girl wasn't even there. As she spoke, her expression turned into a sinister grin. However, the heart-wrenching screams gradually subsided, and no one else could hear them except the zombies. Just as she was about to be torn apart by the zombies, an energy fluctuation suddenly appeared in her mind, shaking away the zombies that were still pouncing on her body. After the zombies were shaken away, they were all stunned. They seemed to be in a daze, and after a while, they got up shakily and left. No zombies paid any more attention to this originally fresh food. After a day, a small group of soldiers appeared from another direction. He led his team to shoot the zombies while moving towards the other side. This was the only passage, and it was surrounded by woods and parks. In this apocalypse, humans were willing to face zombies rather than those mutated beasts. Therefore, places with woods slowly became forbidden areas. Lu Tianyu, who had been dead for a day, was lying stiffly on the ground. The frozen expression on her face was distorted, as if she had suffered great pain. Her 4 limbs had been bitten into tatters, and there was no intact skin on her body. Her entire body was stained with blood, but fortunately, she had not been dismembered into pieces. Her gray eyes were wide open, and her face was gray as she lay there. Gray eyes, this was the characteristic of zombies. Suddenly, the pair of gray and dead eyes moved. If this phenomenon was seen by a living person, they would be scared to death. Because this was a precursor to turning into a zombie, the woman's eyes moved and then moved again. Suddenly, his grayish-white eyes were quickly dyed black. Not only her eyes, but even the whites of her eyes had turned cold black. At this time her body also changed slightly. Her nails grew out automatically, becoming sharp and hard. The rancid smell on her body also disappeared. She moved, and then sat up from the ground in a somewhat unnatural posture. She looked around blankly. After more than 10 seconds she wanted to stand up. However, she found that her body didn't seem to be listening to her. After trying a few times, she found that she couldn't stand up. Because her knees were stiff, she looked left and right, but there was nothing she could hold on to. In the end, Lin Xiao could only try to bend her knees, and it took her a long time to stand up. In the end, she discovered something terrifying. Lin Xiao looked at her hands in a daze. Her black, sharp nails, and there were still purplish-black bloodstains in the fingernails. The bones and flesh on her dirty hands and arms had been gnawed until only white arm bones were left, and the skin on the back of her hands was gray and blue, with black blood stains. Moreover, her whole body was stiff, and her hands and feet were not coordinated. There was a sense of loss. She looked at her hands with a dumbfounded face, and then looked at her body. She couldn't believe it and closed her eyes and then opened them again. This tattered and unrecognizable body was still the same. She suddenly screamed at the sky, what the hell is this? But what came out was roar, 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 roar. Maybe because her roar was too strange, the zombies who were besieging the small group of humans were all quiet for a moment, and all turned their heads to look at her. And the humans who were fighting against the zombies were also stunned at this time. They did the same action as the zombies and turned their heads to look at her. All the humans. This zombie's roar is so strange. All the zombies. What is this kind of roar? However, these humans and zombies quickly put this strange zombie at the back of their minds. They continued what they were doing just now. Lin Xiao looked at her empty stomach and was dumbfounded. Damn, what the hell was this? Who could tell her what the hell was going on? Was she dreaming? She looked up and suddenly saw two groups of people not far away. Why did the group of people on the periphery look like zombies in the movies? She turned her head to look at the surrounding environment, and what came into her eyes was a ruin washed by the smoke and fire of war. Old and shabby buildings, everything was broken, and nothing was left of the windows. The scene on the side of the road was also terrible, and the traffic had been paralyzed. Crashed cars were randomly thrown on the side of the road, or blocked in the middle of the road. Some of the street lamps had fallen, and some were crooked. There was a lot of gravel and smoke around. The appearance of the trees also became very strange. Chapter 2. Lin Xiao was at a loss for what to do in this unfamiliar environment. She looked around blankly, feeling the reality of this world. She must be dreaming. She was definitely dreaming. She looked down at her stomach. Also, her stomach had been dug out, so why was she still conscious? And the sound she made just now? Lin Xiao was about to go crazy. She seemed to have just had a fever, so she took the medicine and slept. How did the world become like this when she woke up? Yes, she must be dreaming. She was dreaming. She was dreaming. Lin Xiao hypnotized herself in her heart. Because she had fallen asleep after taking the medicine, she hadn't actually woken up yet. Otherwise, how could she not feel anything when her body had become like this? Before she could figure it out, there was a sudden dull pain in her head. Scenes of memories that did not belong to her rushed into her mind in a messy manner. The dull pain in her head immediately turned into a swelling pain that felt like it was going to burst her head. Lin Xiao's face immediately wrinkled, and she opened her mouth wide and shouted, "Roar!" Then her body tilted and she fell to the ground. In the picture, there was an ordinary cute girl who had grown from a cute little bun into a beautiful young girl. Scenes of her childhood flashed before her eyes, from primary school to middle school to high school to college. This girl's name was Lu Tianyu, and she had originally been admitted to the university she wanted. It was a very happy thing, but on the first day of college the world suddenly changed. The freshmen in the classroom were looking at everyone curiously and introducing themselves one by one. Until it was the turn of a female student who had been lying on the table without moving, things went wrong. The student couldn't wake up no matter how hard they tried, and she didn't wake up even when they pushed her. The teacher had to ask two male students to help the female student to the infirmary to rest. However, when the two male students helped the unconscious female student to the classroom door, the female student suddenly opened her eyes. But her eyes were gray. She opened her eyes and didn't speak, but after 2 seconds she suddenly turned her head, opened her mouth, and bit the neck of a male student who was supporting her. The miserable scream penetrated the entire teaching building. Everyone hurriedly rescued the male student, but the male student had already fainted. As for the female student who bit them, she became extremely strong. A few boys couldn't hold her down and were scratched and bitten by her, injuring a few students. This kind of thing began to appear in various places in the city, alarming the government agencies and the public security police. On that day, all the police and military forces were mobilized to clean up similar messes. And that night, the world became very quiet. When he woke up the next morning, he saw a horrifying world of destruction. Only 30% of humanity was awake, while 70% had become slow-moving, mindless zombies that only crazily wanted to eat humans. The memories were actually very chaotic, but Lin Xiao gradually connected them together. Although there were many flaws, it did not prevent her from confirming one thing. But these were all other people's memories. However, from the memory of this girl named Lu Tianyu, Lin Xiao realized something else. It had been 5 years since the end of the world, and the time when the end of the world happened was the day after she had a fever for the past few days and fell asleep after taking the medicine for the last time. The next day, many people woke up early in the morning and became mindless zombies that would only bite people when they saw them. Of course, there were still many people who woke up normally. It was just that there were a small number of people who looked normal on the outside, but their physical fitness had become different. The latter kind of people just didn't last long. People who had stimulated their abilities. This Lu Tianyu was now 23 years old. In Lu Tianyu's later memories, when she woke up in the end of the world, she did not become a zombie, nor did she stimulate her abilities. She was just an ordinary person. In the end of the world, which was full of chaos and war, she had no ability to protect herself at all. Therefore, she could only use her body and deep scheming in exchange for a chance to survive. Fortunately, she has a beautiful face. After the end of the world. After the end of the world, the number of women dropped sharply like a rare animal. In a base, 90% of the men and 10% of the women. Therefore, as a beautiful woman, she was still very favored. Because she liked to scheme against people since she was young, she used all kinds of vicious means to frame people, which allowed her to survive in this dangerous and chaotic end of the world. But the strange thing was that Lin Xiao could remember a lot of Lu Tianyu's memories, but they were not complete. She felt that she still missed a lot of things. For example, Lin Xiao didn't know what Lu Tianyu had done recently. A large number of unfamiliar memories of more than 20 years filled her mind. Lin Xiao was in a trance, almost losing her original heart and forgetting who she was. Was it Lin Xiao? Or was it Lu Tianyu? Fortunately, when she had a splitting headache, a cool feeling spread in her mind. It stimulated her original memories, so she didn't change from Lin Xiao to Lu Tianyu. She touched her body with her hand, and the clothes on her body could no longer cover her body. She looked at her empty stomach and the 2 lumps of soft meat on her chest that had been bitten beyond recognition. Lin Xiao finally wanted to cry but had no tears, and that was. She had now become someone else and was reborn in someone else's body. She didn't know if it was her body that didn't wake up the next day like others on that night of the end of the world. Perhaps, she had already become a zombie sister who would bite anyone she saw. Damn it. Even if she was reborn, at least give her a living body. Men, women, old and young would do. What was the meaning of this broken zombie body? Even if she was given a zombie body, at least give her a complete one. Whoa. Lin Xiao raised her head and roar. As if feeling her dissatisfaction, the surrounding zombies suddenly quieted down. Then something strange happened. The zombies around Lin Xiao slowly moved away from her. After a while, there was an empty space beside her. Lin Xiao lay on the ground and looked around, the strong feeling of unfamiliarity lingering in her heart. From Lu Tianyu's memory, she also saw the changes and development after the end of the world. She also saw some of Lu Tianyu's actions after the end of the world, although the memory was incomplete. But Lin Xiao also knew that this Lu Tianyu was the most annoying and hateful woman in the entire base. She used her body to exchange for precious materials in the bed of different men, and used vicious means to kill many innocent people. But in this kind of apocalypse, beautiful women were even more popular. 5 years, a whole 5 years had passed. Everyone in the base knew that she was a scheming and lascivious woman. Lin Xiao didn't know why she only woke up now, instead of the day after the end of the world. Why did it take as long as 5 years? What about her family? What about her comrades? Were they still alive? No. She had to find her mother, brother, sister-in-law, sister, and other relatives. She didn't know how they were now, and she didn't know if they had become zombies, or had they become psychics. Chapter 3. Hurry up. There are too many zombies. Watch out on the left. This side is surrounded. We can't get through. Ah, Lin Yu, don't go over there. Lin Yu's hand was scratched by a zombie. Don't come over. Captain, don't let me become a zombie. Kill me. Then. Lin Yu. At that moment, the situation on the other side of the battlefield changed. The situation was turning toward the starving zombies, while some of the human squad members were injured. Then, take care of sister for me. No. Lin Yu, hang in there. This is an order. What will happen to Lin Yin if you die? Lin Xiao didn't hear those conversations with her ears. Instead, those conversations automatically popped up in her head. Apart from those conversations, there were other voices as well. For example, different voices had been repeating the same 2 words. So hungry. So hungry. So hungry. Those voices were like small hammers pounding on her head. Hearing those voices, Lin Xiao once again had a splitting headache. She bared her teeth in pain, slowly turning her body and struggling. Then, you go. I'll hold the line for you. I'll save a bullet for myself. Go now. Lin Yu held the gun with both hands, blowing off a zombie's head with each bullet. He said loudly to Captain Li Zheng. Li Zheng wasn't moved but responded, no. Lin Yu, as many of us came out, we have to go back. I can't leave you alone. Lin Yu yelled excitedly, Captain, there are too many zombies here. We can't all leave. One of us has to stay behind. I'm already infected with the virus. Even if I go back, I'll become a zombie. Let me do it. For some reason, Lin Xiao found Lin Yu's name familiar. However, she couldn't think because of the severe pain in her head. All she could do was roll on the ground and bang her head with her nimble hands while screaming. Roar! The waves of pain blurred Lin Xiao's perception of the surroundings. A day had passed by the time she woke up. She lay on the ground looking at the sky. In fact, she didn't know how long she had been lying on the ground. The only thing she felt now was that she was so hungry. However, when she covered her stomach with her stiff hands, she felt a hole. Damn it, I don't even have a stomach anymore. Why did she still feel hungry? Lin Xiao tried to stand up, but she soon realized that something was wrong with her body. Why can't I bend my knees? How am I supposed to stand up like this? Lin Xiao struggled on the ground for a while before finally standing up. Damn, it's so hard to be a zombie. I'm so hungry now. What should I do? I really want to eat. I really want to eat. Even if she wanted to look for her family, she would need to fill her stomach before she had the strength to do so. Lin Xiao raised her head and sniffed around. He could faintly smell a sweet scent. However, she looked down at her stomach and chest. He raised his stiff hand and tried for a long time before he could bend his hand and pull at his tattered clothes. I can't hide it. Looks like I need to find some decent clothes to cover my body first. Now that she had become a zombie, how was she going to live the rest of her life? What should I do when I'm hungry? Eating people? That was impossible. Would she starve to death if she didn't eat humans? She should be able to eat other creatures instead, right? Lin Xiao tried to move forward, but found that her feet were as stiff as her hands. They were especially heavy, so it was very difficult for her to walk. She had no choice but to slowly move toward a shopping mall in front of her. In this post-apocalyptic world which had been abandoned for 5 years, Lin Xiao didn't know why she didn't wake up until now. She also didn't know if her family had survived the apocalypse, and if they had survived until now. At least, she needed to go to the provincial city in her hometown to find them. However, under the current circumstances, finding a way back was a bit difficult. She needed to find a way back. The internet was down in the city, and long-distance communication was no longer possible. The ruins around her made her feel especially uneasy. Looking at the zombies wandering around, she wondered if she should feel lucky that she had become a conscious zombie. That way, it would be more convenient for her to go anywhere. If she wanted to go back to her hometown, she needed to find a car first. Only with a car could she go back. But now she needed to find some clothes to change into. However, she had spent most of the day strolling up and down the mall. However, she didn't find a single piece of clothing or cloth that she could wear. Furthermore, this severely disabled body of his was extremely exhausted. Strange? Why do zombies feel tired too? Lin Xiao sat on the stairs before the entrance of the shopping mall, struggling with that question. She raised her head to look at the sky. It was noon. She glanced around at the zombies and suddenly had an idea. She could borrow those zombies' clothes to wear, couldn't she? While thinking, she fixed her eyes on a female zombie who was wearing a long dress. She immediately stood up and walked over. Roar! 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 Stop! Hearing Lin Xiao's roar, the female zombie stopped moving. She twisted her broken neck and tilted her pale and ragged face to Lin Xiao. Roar! Lin Xiao stared at the female zombie's pale eyes with her purely dark eyes and roared, roar! 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 Lend me your clothes. Roar! However, the female zombie clearly didn't have intelligence. She didn't understand what Lin Xiao was roaring at. Lin Xiao stopped roaring and walked straight to the female zombie. She raised a hand to tear off the female zombie's clothes. Roar! Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly pull her clothes, the female zombie went crazy. The female zombie suddenly went crazy, raising her zombie claws to scratch Lin Xiao's face. Lin Xiao automatically tilted her head and dodged the female zombie's claws. Meanwhile, she raised a hand to slap the female zombie's face. Clap! The female zombie's head, which was hanging on her neck, was suddenly broken by Lin Xiao's slap. Clap! Her head fell on the ground. Damn! Why did it fall off? Is the female zombie's head only connected to her neck by a piece of skin? Lin Xiao stared at her own claws with confusion. Had she grown stronger? Or was her head already falling off? You want to do this the hard way? How dare you attack me first? Lin Xiao angrily raised a foot to kick the headless zombie. Poof! The zombie's body fell to the ground. Lin Xiao slowly moved closer and squatted. Fuck! I can't bend my knees. At last she sat on the ground. She bent down and reached out a hand to tear off the female zombie's clothes. Thankfully, her fingers were nimble. It took her a lot of effort to put on this dusty dress. Then she bent her stiff hands and buttoned the front of the dress. After that, she patted the dress. Finally, she looked presentable. Lin Xiao sniffed at that alluring aroma again, then slowly walked toward it. I'm so hungry. Let's find out what that aroma is. Perhaps it's something edible? Lin Xiao thought for a moment, then moved toward the aroma step by step with her stiff legs. She walked very slowly, but she had no other choice. Her legs couldn't make her walk faster. If she tried hard, she would fall on her face. Chapter 4. These zombies' reactions were very slow. They basically didn't respond to Lin Xiao's roar, unless Lin Xiao roared a few more times. The rejection in the roar was too strong. Only then would they move a little to the side. After another roar, they would move a little more. The closer she got to the fragrance, the more zombies there were. When Lin Xiao walked to a closed warehouse, she smelled the strong sweet smell coming from inside. But the door was densely packed with zombies. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. She didn't have a watch, so she didn't know the time. So she could only count her steps and walk slowly. When she walked more than 500 steps, she suddenly realized the surrounding zombies were very dense. Lin Xiao didn't like to be touched by these zombies, so she walked and roared at the zombies beside her. Roar, roar. Go away. Lin Xiao squeezed in. Damn it. She couldn't squeeze in, and her hands and feet weren't nimble. She became irritable and roared, roar, roar. Go away. After a roar, the zombies around her stopped and turned their heads to look at her. Maybe Lin Xiao's roar made them feel provoked. Roar. They actually roared at Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao was speechless. Damn it, did they want to fight with her? Looking at these zombies that were beyond recognition, Lin Xiao didn't roar anymore. She directly raised her hand and stabbed her claw into the head of a zombie next to her. She didn't know why, but when she had the intention to attack, the movement of her hand became reflexive, as if it was some kind of instinct. When she realized it, she found that her finger was stabbed straight into the head of that zombie. Fuck! Were her fingers made of fine steel? Could it even pierce through a human head? Lin Xiao pulled out her finger and raised it to her eyes in surprise. Roar! Seeing Lin Xiao pierce through a zombie's head. The other zombies seemed to have received a signal of danger. They all started to retreat. Lin Xiao looked at her finger to confirm again. She stretched out her left arm and grabbed a zombie next to her that had just retreated 2 steps. Then she raised her right hand. Once again, he thrust it towards the other party's head. Pooh! Sure enough, it easily pierced through the other party's skull. Lin Xiao bent his fingers and exerted strength in his arms. Kacha! The zombie's head was broken into 2 pieces by her. Then the zombie fell to the ground. Ding! A crisp sound rang out. Lin Xiao looked down. A white prismatic crystal the size of a fingertip fell out of the zombie's head. Lin Xiao stared at the crystal curiously and wondered if he should squat down to pick it up. Should he? She couldn't bend her legs at all. Fortunately, her waist was soft and could bend. Lin Xiao tried to bend down and let go of the crystal. Although she bent down, it was a little difficult when she reached 90 degrees. She clenched her teeth and finally took the crystal. After straightening up, she heaved a sigh of relief. Lin Xiao didn't notice that after she picked up the crystal, the zombies next to her retreated further. She pinched the crystal and felt a faint heat coming from it. What she didn't know was that if it was an ordinary zombie that touched the crystal, they would be burned to ashes. But Lin Xiao held it in her claws and was fine. Lin Xiao pinched the small crystal with her nails and wanted to see what it was. Suddenly, a black light flashed on her black fingernail, and the prismatic crystal slowly evaporated and disappeared. That's right, it evaporated. There was even a puff of smoke rising. Lin Xiao only felt a warm current flowing through his body in an instant. Huh? What happened? Lin Xiao stared at her black nails strangely. After looking at it for a long time, she couldn't figure out anything and could only give up. She turned her head and looked at the door where the fragrance came from. Suddenly, she found that the surroundings had been cleared. The zombies that were standing just now had now retreated to a position 7 or 8 meters away from Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao looked at the zombies strangely, then slowly walked towards the sealed door. She raised her hands and pushed, but it didn't budge. This was a door made of aluminum alloy. Lin Xiao used her nails to scratch the door. It made a squeaking sound. She raised her hands and didn't know which part of the door had a better chance of winning with her claws. She looked at the place where the door was locked. She couldn't use force, she could only use tricks. She walked over and bent down to study the door lock. A zombie studying the door lock. If this scene was seen by other living people, they would probably drop their glasses to the ground. Lin Xiao scratched and scratched at the keyhole, but in the end, she still couldn't open the lock. She was angry and fiercely inserted her fingers into the tightly closed door. Cha! She actually pierced through it. How could this work? Lin Xiao moved her fingers that were inserted into the door. She used all her strength to push the door to the side. First, there was no reaction, until Lin Xiao took a deep breath and used all her strength to pull the door. The door was bent by Lin Xiao's strength. It revealed a small gap in the door that she could reach in and open the lock from the inside. As soon as the door opened, the fragrance inside filled her nose. Lin Xiao pushed the door open and walked in. It was dark inside, but Lin Xiao could see clearly. She looked towards the source of the fragrance. When she saw what object it was, her face darkened, because it was a person lying on the ground. She didn't know whether he was dead or alive. Lin Xiao walked over. The smell coming from this person was like a fragrant roast pig. It made her feel very hungry. She bent down like an old man beside this person. Smelling the smell on his body, Lin Xiao felt her mouth was drooling. She also extended her claws towards this human. But just as her claws were about to stab into the man's head, she suddenly came back to her senses and put down her claws. Fuck! Was she going to eat him? She straightened up and finally bent down to poke the man's face with her nails. She felt a trace of heat from her nails. Lin Xiao withdrew her claws and looked at the man in surprise. He actually didn't die. But from the looks of it, he had already been infected with the virus, right? Lin Xiao looked at his face. His skin didn't change. It was just that his lips had turned blue. Just as Lin Xiao was thinking about how to deal with this person who was about to turn into a zombie, she suddenly had a severe headache, as if her brain had exploded. Roar! Ah! She raised her head and screamed, her pitch-black eyes wide open. 2 rows of sharp fangs were revealed in her mouth, especially the 2 fangs which had grown a little longer. Lin Xiao's body tilted and fell on the man's body. Suddenly a green light flashed. Lin Xiao and the man suddenly disappeared from where they stood. The empty warehouse was empty. There was no smell of living people. When Lin Xiao woke up, her head was still in a dull pain. But as soon as she opened her eyes, she was stunned. Fuck! Where was this? Why did it change every time she woke up and opened her eyes? Lin Xiao's dark eyes widened. She suddenly lowered her head to look at her body. Then she was disappointed to find that her tattered body hadn't changed, and her dress hadn't changed either. But Chapter 5. However, she turned her head and looked at the fresh green beside her. The fresh air was as pristine and clean as if it had not been polluted by modern industrialization. Although it was all grass, Lin Xiao's mood improved a lot when she saw the large green lawn. She struggled stiffly for a long time before standing up again. As a result, she accidentally slipped and fell down again. Lin Xiao only felt that her fangs, which were exposed in her open mouth, seemed to have pierced into something. When she took a closer look, she was so scared that she immediately pulled out her teeth and sat up. What the hell? There was another person beside her, the person who had been infected with the virus just now. She even fell on him. She seemed to have bitten him. Why would this person appear here with her? Where was this place? How did she appear? She looked up at the white sky, but she couldn't see the sun. She turned her head and observed from left to right. She found that other than the grass, there was also a small lake that reflected the clear water. Lin Xiao was happy when she saw the lake. She immediately raised her legs and leaned towards the lake. When she woke up, it was summer. Although her zombie body couldn't feel the heat, she couldn't stand the tattered and dirty look on her body. Lin Xiao didn't notice that the man who was about to die and had the virus spreading all over his body had changed. A strange change occurred on his face. His originally pale skin slowly returned to its normal color, and the green color on his lips slowly faded. It was obvious that the virus was slowly disappearing from his body. Although the speed was very slow, the virus would slowly disappear after a period of time. In fact, the fastest place for the virus to disappear from the man's body was his chest, where Lin Xiao's teeth had pierced into his flesh. Lin Xiao didn't know all of this. She was excitedly walking towards the small lake. Although it looked quite close, she still had to limp for a long time before she reached the lake. She lay by the lake and drank a few mouthfuls of the lake water with her claws. She took off the dress that she had put on with great difficulty, and saw that it was a terrible sight to look at inside. One could imagine how cruel the pain Lu Tianyu had suffered before he died. She took off her tattered clothes and pants and bent down to wash them in the water. It took her a long time to wash them clean. Couldn't be helped because Lin Xiao was a bit of a neat freak. Therefore, when she saw the condition of her body, she felt that her whole body was in bad shape. When he bent over, his intestines hung out again. Lin Xiao simply sat in the lake and washed his intestines with his hands before stuffing them back into his stomach. Then, he washed the torn clothes that he had taken off and wrapped the torn clothes around his stomach. Due to her obsessive-compulsive disorder, it took her a long time to make it look clean and tidy. She didn't feel anything at all. It was just that the visual style was a little strange. After wrapping her stomach, she began to wash her arms and legs that had been bitten into a bloody mess. There was a piece of flesh missing here and there, and a piece of flesh missing there. Lin Xiao didn't notice the soaked wounds when she bathed in the lake water. A surge of energy slowly seeped into her blood from the wound. Her congealed black blood slowly began to flow again. Meanwhile, the wounds on her body were healing automatically. However, there was no new flesh growing. It only sped up the scab formation, and the virus in her body had disappeared completely. However, on the surface, she still looked like a zombie with fangs bared in her mouth. She didn't notice any of this. It was just like how she didn't notice the man's condition. As she washed, Lin Xiao suddenly felt a little sleepy. Before she could react, her vision suddenly turned black and she fell asleep. He slept for 3 days straight. When she woke up, she found that she was still soaking in the water. She moved her body, turned around and climbed ashore. She suddenly realized that her legs had become nimble. Lin Xiao stood on the shore, raised her leg, put it down, raised her leg, put it down again and kicked. She was as nimble as a living person. She stared with her dark eyes at her hands and then at her legs. She shook her hands and legs, and then bent her waist left and right. Although she still looked the same as before, she felt much better than before. She was so happy that she punched out fiercely. She actually succeeded. The strength of her movements was a little lacking, but her speed was very fast. She wondered if her voice had become better. Lin Xiao thought about it, opened her mouth and said, "Hello." Roar, roar. Hearing the roar that came out of her mouth, a drop of sweat appeared on Lin Xiao's forehead. It didn't seem to work. Lin Xiao sighed and raised her head to look around. She saw the man again. She didn't know how long she had been lying in the water, but the man was still awake. She walked over and now she could squat down. The fragrance on the man's body was stronger than before. Lin Xiao felt very hungry. She scratched the man's neck with her black nails. She looked up at the sky blankly. Where was this? How did they appear here? How could she get out? Get out. She was just thinking of how to get out. However, there was a flash in front of her, and then she felt her body sway. She fell to the ground. Roar, fuck. What the hell? When Lin Xiao came to her senses, she saw that her surroundings were pitch black. What was going on? It was still a white sky just now. Why was it suddenly pitch black? Fortunately, Lin Xiao's eyes were very sharp, and she could see things clearly in the dark. However, the scene was like a black and white photo. She looked to the side and sure enough the man was here. Wait a minute, the surroundings seemed a little familiar. Lin Xiao looked up again, and then she recognized it. Wasn't this the warehouse where she opened the door and saw the man? Why was she here again? Where was the grassland and the small lake from before? Where did they go? She stood up and turned around to look outside the door. It was empty. There were no zombies or anything else. Lin Xiao couldn't understand. She was clearly in another place just now. Why did she suddenly run here again? She thought about the situation just now, and didn't know what went wrong. So she appeared here again. That's right, she was thinking about how she appeared in that place just now. She was thinking about how to get out, and then she ended up here. Go out? That's right. Could it be that? Lin Xiao had a faint feeling, and she raised her hand to touch her forehead. Can I go in? Just as the thought flashed through her mind, there was another flash in front of Lin Xiao. When she came back to her senses, there was a green grassland in front of her. And that lake. This turned out to be a real space. Could it be that she was also an arcanist? A space arcanist? Lin Xiao thought uncertainly, and she touched her forehead with her sharp claws again. This time she felt it. She clearly felt that there was something between her eyebrows on her forehead, and it seemed to be related to this space. Could it be that her arcanist core was on her forehead? Lin Xiao tried to think of another idea. Chapter 6. Get out. I want to go out. As a result, a white light flashed, and when she came back to her senses, the person was already outside in the pitch-black warehouse. It was really space. Lin Xiao began to get excited. She actually had space. She couldn't believe it. I want to go in, she said in her heart again. Sure enough, Lin Xiao appeared in the space again. Roar. Lin Xiao let out a happy roar. But of course, the sound wasn't very beautiful. Lin Xiao, who was shocked by her own voice, immediately shut her mouth and stopped talking. But she was so hungry now, and there was nothing to eat in this space. There was only grass and a lake. Did she want to eat grass? Lin Xiao walked to the lake and looked at the clear water. When she was washing her body, she noticed that there were no live fish in the lake. She thought for a moment and said, "Get out." Then her figure appeared in the warehouse again. She was so hungry. This man couldn't eat. Then she would have to find something else to eat. She just didn't know if this man would be eaten by other zombies if she left him here. Should she wake him up? Also, was this person going to become a zombie? Maybe he would die in a short while and then his body would harden into a zombie and stand up? Lin Xiao looked at the man. In any case, this person wouldn't be able to survive. Probably wouldn't be long before he turned into a zombie. After struggling for a while, she finally walked out. Forget it, she didn't care about this person. She should take care of herself first. Now that he had become a zombie, she didn't know what to do. From Lu Tianyu's memories, she also learned that there was a type of person in this apocalypse. They could hunt zombies. That was a superpower user. In the past 5 years after a catastrophe humans had experienced, it didn't take long for them to get used to this kind of life. They slowly adapted and finally there was a type of person. A small number of superpowers. It was very difficult to awaken a superpower. Generally, only 1 in 10,000 people would awaken a superpower. Moreover, this superpower was divided into various types. The team that Lu Qianyu was in before originally had more than 100 people. In the end, because of those 3 superpowers, the number of people slowly decreased as they fled. Those 3 superpowers didn't protect everyone, because they felt that they had no obligation to protect others. However, they enjoyed the feeling of superiority as mutants. Under the support and dependence of ordinary people, they slowly felt that they were a cut above others. In this post-apocalyptic world where people died at every turn, staying alive was the most important thing. Therefore, these ordinary people without combat power were like ants under their feet. Behind them were the powerful adepts, as well as the military officers and soldiers who were already in the army. Together they built several bases. Slowly, as the metahumans became stronger and more powerful, the number of metahumans increased. The scope of the base became larger and larger, and the base began to hunt the zombies surrounding the base. Using a zombie head to exchange for the most scarce food in the post-apocalyptic world. Humans have developed but zombies have not. 5 years had passed and the human base was getting bigger and bigger. There was no end to the zombies, but the zombies were still zombies without mobility, intelligence, and souls. If this continues, perhaps after a few decades these zombies may also be killed a lot. Not long after Lin Xiao left, the man lying on the ground rolled his eyes and opened them. Lin Yu sat up in a daze. His surroundings were pitch black. He couldn't see anything clearly, but he could still see the darkness outside the door. He was stunned for a while, then slowly stood up and walked out. What happened to him? He remembered that he locked himself in a warehouse, feeling his muscles getting harder and harder, and his skin getting tighter and tighter. At that time he knew that he was turning into a zombie. Later he felt that his whole body was stiff, and his hands and feet were so heavy that he couldn't even lift them. His eyelids also sank and finally he couldn't stand it anymore and fell asleep. At that time he already knew that once he fell asleep, he would never wake up again. Even if others saw him wake up, they would only see that he was a zombie without consciousness. At any time he could be shot in the forehead by others, and then he wouldn't be able to become a zombie. But what was the situation now? Could it be that he could become a ghost after he died? Like the ghost of Floaty? Lin Yu raised his hand, put it in his mouth and bit it. Ouch! It hurts. Biting too hard, Lin Yu screamed in pain. Then he covered his hand and jumped twice. What happened? Am I not dead? After calming down, Lin Yu looked at his body blankly. He found that his body wasn't stiff at all. He felt it when he walked out. He suddenly thought of something, touched his waist, and a military dagger appeared in his hand. Popping out the blade, he slashed the back of his other hand. Yes, the blade cut a blood mark, although it couldn't be seen in the dark. But Lin Yu put the wound on the back of his hand to his mouth, and licked it with his tongue. Fishy, salty, and with a little sweetness. The taste of blood. Lin Yu was a little confused. He was indeed infected by the zombie virus. He didn't remember it wrong. Before he fainted, he still remembered that his body had begun to harden. Why was it all gone now? He was no different from a normal person, and even his blood was fresh. While Lin Yu was shocked by the changes in his body, Lin Xiao had already walked far away. She was very hungry now. Very hungry. Lin Xiao raised his head, looking at the starry sky above his head. The stars were still there, but the moon was nowhere to be seen. It seemed that it was either the beginning or the end of the lunar month. Under the starry sky, Lin Xiao's vision became clearer. She wanted to find food, but what to eat? She was now a zombie, and besides eating people, what else could zombies eat? It seemed that she couldn't eat human food anymore. Although it was very late, Lin Xiao could see everything clearly. Thinking about it, she could only walk around and look around. Moreover, she had to find her family. She didn't know if they were still alive, and if they would live in some corner. Lin Xiao looked in the direction. She knew from Lu Qianyu's memory where she was now, and her hometown was in the south, which was the current southern Cloud Island base, And the direction Lu Qianyu and his people were going was the big base of Wuxia City. It was the opposite direction of Southern Cloud Island, so if Lin Xiao wanted to go south now, she had to go back in the opposite direction. It was dark, where could she go? And Southern Cloud Island base was in the southern seaside city, more than 1,000 kilometers away from Sea City in the Middle East. She had no map, no car. If she wanted to go to Southern Cloud Island base, she had to get these two things first. But she was now a zombie, where could she find these two things? After thinking about it, she decided to go to the nearest Wuxia city first. Around the human base she could meet human beings. If she met human beings, she could find a way to get these two things. At night there were zombies walking around everywhere, which looked very scary. Although Lin Xiao was also a zombie now, looking at these zombies swaying around at night, he still felt creeped out. Look more and get used to it. Look more and get used to it. Look more and get used to it. She hypnotized herself in her heart, and then set off in the direction of the north. Chapter 7. The only good thing about the night was that it was much cooler, and there wasn't as much sun as in the day. Lin Xiao walked more normally this time, and her speed was also much faster. She didn't feel the stiffness in her legs anymore. What was going on? Why could she move so flexibly now? She thought as she walked, and as she walked, her nose suddenly twitched. A strange aroma floated over from nowhere. There was a fragrance. It could be eaten. When she smelled this fragrance, Lin Xiao instinctively thought of this. It seemed like this was the aroma of food. She raised her nose and sniffed carefully, and found that the smell came from the forest on the left. Lin Xiao turned around following the smell, and walked towards the strange forest. The forest was dark, but it didn't hinder Lin Xiao's owl-like night vision. She could see it clearly. Her eyes were good, and so was her nose. It seemed that turning into a zombie wasn't that bad after all. The closer she got to the forest city, the stronger the aroma. She also faintly smelled something else. But Lin Xiao didn't give up on the one she smelled at the beginning. She dug around in the forest, using her hands to push aside the vines, and in the forest where there was no road, she dug out a small path. Some thorny vines and leaves scratched her skin, but she didn't feel anything. After digging for a long time, the aroma got closer and closer. Almost there. It could be eaten. Food that could be eaten by zombies. It shouldn't be a human. Lin Xiao prayed in her heart. If this aroma was a human, she would bite off her own flesh and eat it. When she walked in front of a big tree, she was stunned. Looking at the root of the big tree, there was a hole. The aroma came from this hole. It wasn't a human. Good. This hole was very small, only the size of a human head. Lin Xiao squatted down, and lowered her head to look into the hole. Squeak! Suddenly a fist-sized black shadow jumped out from the hole, and flew towards Lin Xiao's face like lightning. It was too late to raise her hand to block it. Shit! What the hell? The frightened Lin Xiao unconsciously exposed her sharp teeth. Her body subconsciously stepped back, and fiercely bit the black shadow. Squeak! A scream came from Lin Xiao's mouth. To be precise, it was the thing in her mouth that made the sound. Lin Xiao felt like he was biting something furry in his mouth, and he was struggling violently. However, sweet blood seeped into Lin Xiao's mouth from that thing's body, because her sharp teeth had already bitten through this thing. Sure enough, it didn't struggle for long before it softened. Lin Xiao raised his hand and took out the thing in his mouth. He was speechless. Damn it, this was a very fat mouse, and it was a mutated one. Lin Xiao raised the dying rat in front of his eyes and sized it up. After the mutation, the rat's size didn't change much, but the two front teeth in its mouth were very sharp and long. They had grown out of his mouth and were hanging on both sides of his mouth. The fur on its body was also much longer than that of an ordinary rat. She licked the blood in her mouth and didn't feel any discomfort. It was also fishy and sweet, which was acceptable. Lin Xiao grabbed the mouse's tail and smiled. Since this mutated rat could be eaten, did that mean that she could eat other animals? As for whether there would be side effects, she would have to wait until she finished eating this rat first. Squeak! At this time, a few strange sounds came from the cave. From the sound, Lin Xiao judged that it should be the baby rats. She reached in and touched it. Sure enough, she felt a lump of soft and slippery little things. Looking at the 5 or 6 little rats that hadn't grown fur in her palm, Lin Xiao suddenly had an idea. They were so small that they weren't even enough to fill the gap between her teeth. She wondered if she could raise them in her space. Thinking about it, she focused her mind and silently said a sentence. Go in. The next second, Lin Xiao appeared on the green lawn with a big rat in one hand and a small rat in the other. Although she wanted to raise them, the big rat had already been bitten to death by her. Lin Xiao glanced at the big rat, and then looked at the 6 little rats. What could she raise them with? Other than grass, there was only lake water in this space. She put the big rat aside and squatted down. She casually picked a handful of grass leaves, rubbed them with one hand, and then put them on the ground. She made a small nest shape, and then put the baby rats in her hands on these grass nests. Forget it, let's not care about it for now. Let's put them here first. If they couldn't survive, then just eat them directly. Lin Xiao turned to look at the big rat and thought about it. She didn't have any tools to start a fire, how could she eat it? Besides, she didn't know if zombies ate cooked food. What if they ate something bad? Then she would have to continue eating raw meat in the future? She took the big rat and directly went out of her space. Looking around, it was all woods and bushes. Moreover, she had already walked a long way from the place where people lived. This was all the wilderness, and she couldn't find anything to start a fire. She didn't have the special ability of fire. Finally, Lin Xiao stared at the dead rat and made up her mind. She flashed her claws and directly skinned it. She didn't have much of an opinion about eating mice, because when they were training in the jungle, they stayed in the big forest for half a month without food. For a whole 15 days, they survived by eating the things in the mountains. It was already good to have rats. At that time, they also ate snakes, frogs, bugs, and so on. But at that time, they had an advantage, and that was fire. But now Lin Xiao sighed and skillfully peeled off the big mouse. There was a thin layer of membrane under the rat's skin. Along this layer of membrane, it was easy to peel the rat's skin until it was smooth, and it didn't bleed. Twisting the rat's head, she directly twisted it off and threw it away. Lin Xiao used the tip of her nails to gently scratch the rat's chest all the way to the belly button. First, she pulled out the intact intestines inside and threw them away. Then she dug out the liver. She smelled it, but there was no fishy smell. She stuck out her tongue and licked it. It was soft and a little warm. Lin Xiao took a deep breath before putting the raw rat liver into her mouth. She didn't dare to bite it directly. After holding it for a while, she actually felt a little sweet. She couldn't help but bite it with her teeth. The texture was a little soft, but the taste was actually not bad. There was no fishy smell, no strange smell, and it was sweet and soft. Lin Xiao chewed a few times and finished eating the rat liver. After eating the first bite of raw food, there was not so much psychological pressure for the rest. Lin Xiao directly put the rat meat into her mouth, and finally, even the bones were chewed into pieces, and she swallowed it into her stomach. Thinking of her stomach, Lin Xiao suddenly flipped open her skirt and looked at her abdomen, which was tied with a circle of cloth. She hesitated whether she should open it to see if her stomach was still there. Previously, she only saw the intestines exposed outside. She didn't see any other organs, so she didn't pay much attention. Now she was a little scared. If there was no stomach, would the food fall out? Lin Xiao touched her stomach with her hand and felt that it was still broken. But she didn't feel uncomfortable. Thinking about it, she felt that something was wrong. When she woke up, she saw that this body's stomach had been scratched into pieces, but she still felt inexplicably hungry. This was the only feeling of a zombie, right? Chapter 8. She had some rat meat to fill her stomach, but she was still a little hungry. She still wanted to eat meat. As she thought about it, she sniffed the air with her nose again. There was a faint fragrance coming from afar. It could be eaten. As she sniffed, Lin Xiao's feet automatically followed the fragrance again. Along the way, she drilled in and out of the forest. She was surprised to come out of the forest. She appeared on a grassland with weeds everywhere. The grass on the grassland was very tall, about a meter high. It was all up to her thighs. She walked towards the fragrance and found that when she came to the grassland, the fragrance was getting stronger and stronger. When she walked to a position, she found that the fragrance stopped again. She looked down and felt that it should be underground. Lin Xiao squatted down and looked at the grass roots. There was no grass growing under it. She dug with her claws. The soil was soft. It seemed that there should be a hole below. It felt a little like a rabbit hole. Without thinking, she quickly dug on the ground with both hands. She found that her nails were very useful now. They could even pierce through a human skull. What was this soil? Thus, he waved his claws and dug the pit very quickly. After a while she dug a big hole here. There was a tunnel below. She continued to dig along the tunnel. A few minutes later, Lin Xiao had already dug half a meter deep. As she was digging, a gray shadow suddenly jumped out from the underground tunnel. Fortunately, Lin Xiao reacted quickly and she was already on guard. After the gray shadow jumped out, she suddenly reached out and grabbed. It was like catching a furry animal. She lifted it up and took a look. Wow! What a big rabbit! This rabbit was no longer the size of a normal rabbit. The one in her hand was twice the size of a normal rabbit. It was as big as a half-grown dog. After seeing this gray rabbit, a thought flashed through Lin Xiao's mind. This one is enough to eat. The rabbit in Lin Xiao's hand was very fierce. Its 2 legs kicked fiercely, its front claws scratched wildly, and its body struggled violently. It wanted to break free from Lin Xiao's hand. Lin Xiao's hand grabbed the fur on its back, and her claws had already pierced into the flesh. Seeing that the rabbit was struggling with great strength, she couldn't help but bare her fangs and open her mouth to bite the rabbit's neck. After waiting for more than half an hour, Lin Xiao wiped her mouth and looked at the clean rabbit skin in her hand. I wonder if I can put this fur into the space. After some thought, she stared at the fur on her hand and muttered, "Withdraw." As soon as she finished chanting, the fur on her hand disappeared. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. "Go in." With another chant, Lin Xiao disappeared from where he stood. After a while, she appeared out of thin air on the grass. He went in to confirm whether the rabbit skin had been kept or not. Sure enough, that space could store things. She didn't need to follow him in, she just needed to touch him. Standing in the hole in the grass, she was ready to turn around and leave. But at this time there was a little movement in the rabbit hole. Her movements paused for a moment. Was there a rabbit inside? With this thought, she couldn't help but squat down again. He reached in and felt a sudden pain in his finger. She pulled her hand out and saw a fist-sized gray rabbit dangling from her finger. The little rabbit was biting her finger with his teeth and kicking his hind legs. It was as if she had caught it with her fingers as if she was fishing. "Xiao Lin." He grabbed with his other hand. "Withdraw." Thus, the little rabbit also entered her space. She reached into the hole and continued to dig, but after a few minutes there was nothing. Sighing, she stood up. Looking up at the sky, she turned around and walked back. She didn't know if it was because he was full, but some of Lu Qianyu's intermittent memories appeared again. The headache appeared again, but this time it wasn't as fierce as before. Intermittent memories appeared in his mind. A large group of soldiers appeared in the camp in the wilderness, and Lu Qianyu was among them. However, she often appeared beside a small child, who was only 4 or 5 years old. It was a girl. The memories weren't complete. Lin Xiao sensed the images in her mind, but in the end they stopped in a room. The little girl's hands and feet were tied, and her mouth was taped. Her bright black eyes were filled with fear. And the person who kidnapped the little girl was Lu Qianyu himself. It was only then that Lin Xiao recalled this matter. Many of the memories that flashed through her mind were very chaotic, and they were all things from the past. In the past 6 months, not many memories appeared in Lin Xiao's mind, so she quickly ran back. She didn't know if the little guy was still alive. He had been locked up for 3 or 4 days, and she didn't know if he had starved to death. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao felt a deep disgust for Lu Qianyu. This woman was too self-centered and unscrupulous. Her heart was too vicious. She even harmed children. She deserved to be bitten to death by zombies. A zombie wearing a loose skirt was running very fast on the road in the dark. Lin Xiao ran very fast, very worried about the child. But the location of that address was still a little too far from her current location. Although her hands and feet weren't as stiff as zombies, she still couldn't run fast. As she ran, she felt another benefit of this zombie body. That was she wouldn't get tired. She didn't have a heartbeat or breathing now. She didn't feel anything when she ran. Anyway, she just kept running. After she had run for 5 kilometers, she finally stopped. Her body still didn't feel anything, as if she wasn't the one running. Just as Lin Xiao was running, there was a faint pain in her head. But because she was worried about the child's safety, she endured it. From time to time, some images flashed in her mind. The naked handsome man under her, with a pair of angry red eyes, the firm and elastic chest muscles, and the white skin that was like a woman's. It was clearly a man. The image flashed again, and two men and another woman appeared. They seemed to move together often, and all three of them were superhumans. The middle-aged man's lecherous eyes, the woman who exuded a cold aura, and a young man with a ferocious face. In the end, the image froze again. The ferocious man's fist was aimed at her, and the sharp ice that the woman threw out also pierced into her shoulders. The middle-aged man's cold words, and the scene of Lu Tianyu shouting before he died. At the same time, Lin Xiao thought to herself, I wonder if this is considered retribution? She had harmed many people in the past, but in the end, she was killed by her accomplices. Because she had the body of a zombie, nothing came out to stop her when she ran in the dark. As she ran, she was multitasking, piecing together the messy memories in her mind. In the end, the conclusion was that this lecherous woman had taken a fancy to a man. In order to get a man, she had kidnapped a 5-year-old child. Then she had raped the man. Fuck. This woman had done such a thing before she died. She had raped any man. But she had raped a man who seemed to be incredible. Lin Xiao couldn't help but be speechless. She prayed in her heart that she wouldn't meet that man. It was better to secretly send the child back. But that child, she didn't know if he was still alive. Fuck. Just as Lin Xiao was running nonstop toward the city, in the warehouse where Lu Tianyu was killed by Lu Hongshi and the others, a squadron of soldiers had been resting here for 2 days. Chapter 9. On the top platform of the warehouse, a slender 1.8 tall man stood on the edge, wearing a camouflage military uniform, looking up at the dark sky. At this time, a tall man in a camouflage military uniform came up, turned his head to look, and walked over to the man who was originally standing on the platform. I knew you would be here. Although I know you are worried about Lingling, but you have not rested for several days. Go down and rest. Don't collapse before you find Lingling. The tall man sighed and said, Delung, I don't know if Lingling is alive or dead. How could I fall asleep? It's all my fault for being too careless. I let that woman deceive Lingling. Wu Chongyue's handsome face had a depressed expression. His beautiful eyes were bloodshot, and his eyes were full of anxiety, regret, pain, and an extremely strong killing intent. Xiao Yunlong patted him on the shoulder and said, Don't worry. The seed that little you planted on Lingling has not died, which means that Lingling is still alive. We will work hard to find her. We will definitely save Lingling. The expression on Wu Chongyue's face changed. A cold killing intent covered his face, and the veins on his forehead bulged. He gritted his teeth and said, I must kill that woman. If anything happens to Lingling, I will tear her to pieces. In the end of the world, it was common for a woman to be raped by other men, or to be gang raped by several men together. After all, in the end of the world, women were too rare. Men had not vented, and would always do some forced things. And now in this world, the strongest fist was the hard truth. It all depended on strength to speak, and strength was the rule of the present world. But a man being raped by a woman, the more Wu Chongyue thought, the stronger the killing intent in his heart. However, he did not know that the woman he wanted to tear to pieces had already been eaten by zombies. Now she had been resurrected by another soul in the body of a zombie. Xiao Yunlong said, That woman can't have run far. As long as she is still in this city, we will definitely find her. At this time, on the other side, Lin Xiao was searching through her memory, while looking for the place where the little girl was hidden. Not long after, she arrived in front of a dilapidated freezer. He placed his hand on the door and tried to sense the aura inside, but he couldn't sense anything. This freezer was used to freeze meat. After the apocalypse, there was no electricity, so it was abandoned. However, the buildings here were especially sturdy and thick. Ordinary zombies would not be able to break through the thick iron gates. However, because it was airtight inside, even though the isolation rooms inside were open, the space was not small. Lin Xiao didn't know if the child had suffocated to death. After all, a few days had passed. Standing in front of the freezer, she looked at the lock on the door. The zombie's face frowned. She looked down and began to search her body, but there were no keys in any of his pockets. How was he supposed to open the door? What to do? Without the key, the door could not be opened. Lin Xiao anxiously circled around the area twice, ignoring the zombies that were passing by. Although these zombies looked very scary at night, but after looking at them for a long time, you will find that they are very scary. There was nothing to be scared of, especially when they were no longer in danger. Lin Xiao spun around twice and looked at his sharp claws that were still gleaming with a cold light. Then she looked at the thick door. She wondered if she should use her claws to break the door. Would she break her claws? This door could not be opened by ordinary people without the key. But she was not an ordinary person now. She raised her hand and inserted the tip of her claws into the thin gap of the door. It could not be inserted. Scratch, 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 scratch. With great difficulty, she managed to hook the gap of the door. But there was a feeling of helplessness. After struggling for a while, Lin Xiao squatted on the ground in frustration. She scratched her head with her claws. What should she do? This door could not be opened and there was no gap like a window inside. At this moment, she suddenly sensed a message in her mind. This way, go this way. She must find the child before the other party. This was a clear message and the purpose was clear. Someone was coming. Lin Xiao suddenly stood up and leaped. She opened the door and hid in the dark room beside her. She hid her figure. After a while she heard a few voices. Did that woman come here? I accidentally saw her walking in this direction. I don't know if she hid the child here. We've searched so many places. Where did that bitch hide the child? Did she kill the child? No, I got the news that the child is not dead yet. Didn't you see that Wu Chengwei hasn't given up? But, no buts. Let's see if there is any place to hide people first. Lin Xiao hid in the dark and stared at the three people who appeared outside with a pair of black eyes that were different from normal people. It was them. The three paranormals who had plotted against Lu Tianyu. Lin Xiao looked at the three of them while avoiding the zombies that kept approaching them. She seemed to be looking for something. She didn't expect that the three of them also wanted the little girl, but what did they want to do with the little girl? She didn't know. No matter how she looked at it, the three of them didn't look like good people. But she felt a sense of crisis from the three of them. She knew that the three of them were stronger than her. She couldn't beat them. That was why she hid so obediently. She watched as the three of them slowly approached the warehouse where the child was kept. Huh, there's a freezer here. Liang Qian pointed to the freezer where Lin Xiao was standing just now and said. Lin Yong's eyes flashed and he said, people can be hidden in the freezer. Zombies can't break in here. Lu Hongshi asked, will that woman hide the child here? The three of them looked at each other and felt that this possibility was very high. Lin Yong said, let's go in and take a look. As he said that, he raised his palm and a string of flames appeared in his palm. Then he pressed it into the position of the door lock with the backhand. Lin Xiao quietly watched their movements. She saw two younger men and women with their backs facing the door of the freezer, facing the zombies approaching from outside. They killed one by one to stop the zombies from approaching. The middle-aged man behind was facing the door lock and doing something. After a full 10 minutes, because the three of them stayed there, more and more zombies were attracted and gathered here. Roar, roar, roar. The zombies bared their fangs and brandished their claws at the three of them. But they were either pierced in the head by Liang Qian with an icicle or beaten in the head by Lu Hongshi with a steel rod. But as the number of zombies increased, the two of them were gradually overwhelmed. Just when the two of them couldn't help but ask if Lin Yong was done, Lin Yong took a step back. On the thick door in front of him, the shape of the door lock had been distorted. As if it had been melted by the high temperature, it became strange. Bang! Lin Yong heavily punched the distorted door lock. Then with a caw sound, the door opened by itself. Seeing that the door was opened by the three of them, Lin Xiao secretly shouted in her mind, not good. She couldn't let the three of them take the child away. She felt that the three of them had evil intentions towards the child. Maybe the child would die in their hands. But she was no match for the three of them. What should she do? Lin Xiao looked at the zombies that had already surrounded the freezer door. And suddenly there was only one thought in her mind. It would be great if these zombies crazily rushed over. Rush up. Everyone rush up. Chapter 10. She didn't realize that she had this thought together. The group of zombies on the other side began to become restless, and their previous stiff movements changed. They started to crazily rush forward regardless of anything. They opened their mouths wide, bared their teeth, and stretched out their hands to rush forward. The surrounding zombies that were slowly rushing over also suddenly stopped in their tracks. Then they crazily rushed towards the direction of the three people. What's going on? Why are these zombies going crazy? The increasing number of zombies had already made the two people on the periphery a little flustered. As a result, the zombies suddenly went crazy and fiercely rushed towards them. The two people's attacks were instantly overwhelmed, and the situation became weaker. Lin Yong had just opened the door when he felt the movement of the surrounding zombies. Before he could open the door, he looked back to see the situation behind him. As a result, he was shocked to see the frenzied zombies around him. He quickly turned around and launched an attack to deal with the zombies that surrounded him. Lin Xiao stared with a pair of dark zombie eyes, looking at the changes outside. He felt a little strange. Why did these zombies suddenly go crazy? However, seeing the three people being attacked by the increasing number of zombies, Lin Xiao's mind flashed. He walked out of the house and mixed into a group of zombies and rushed over. The number of zombies was originally 1 to 200. However, for some unknown reason, there were suddenly a lot of zombies coming from the surrounding. They bared their fangs and brandished their claws at the three people. The number was increasing. What's going on? What's going on? Why are these zombies rioting? Lin Yong threw out flames as he attacked, burning the zombies that were charging at him. He asked in confusion. Lu Hongshi was also a little anxious. There were more and more zombies. A layer of sweat appeared on his face, and he replied loudly, "I don't know." They suddenly went crazy. The three people were busy fighting against the zombies. The level of the three people's abilities was not very high. Moreover, the number of zombies was increasing, which made it more and more difficult for them to resist. In the end, Lu Hongshi was a little anxious. "We can't do it anymore. There are more and more zombies. Our strength is going to be exhausted. Let's get out of here first. If this continues, we'll have to leave. We will be surrounded by zombies and eventually be eaten." At this time, Lin Xiao had already moved past the zombies and quickly went to the wall. Looking at the three of them, they had no choice but to give up the freezer because more and more zombies were approaching. He forcefully opened up a path and temporarily left this place. Seeing the three people leave, he also brought the group of zombies away from the freezer. Lin Xiao walked to the door of the freezer, raised his claws and pushed the door in. After Lin Xiao pushed the door open, the two zombies that were still standing near the door turned into zombies. He turned around with a strange expression, his gray eyes staring at the door in front of Lin Xiao. It was as if something was attracting them. Lin Xiao's nose was a few times more sensitive than those zombies with no IQ. He had already smelled an alluring fragrance. He felt that the zombies around him seemed to want to get closer to the door. Roar! Lin Xiao fiercely roared at them, and the strong will in his consciousness rushed towards the zombies. Roar! Roar! Oh, woo! The surrounding zombies retreated after being roared, then instantly turned around and left. Seeing this situation, Lin Xiao was slightly stunned for a moment. Then she didn't care anymore. She just wanted to see how the child was doing. Smelling the fragrance, she confirmed that there was the breath of a living person inside. Although the fragrance was very faint, it was very faint. Lin Xiao pushed the door open, walked in and then closed the door. It was completely dark inside, and she couldn't see her fingers in front of her. However, she could clearly see the surrounding environment, so she could see everything inside. There were many compartments in this freezer, and Lin Xiao smelled the fragrance and walked towards one of them. Looking inside, she saw a lump of something in the corner of the wall. Lin Xiao hurriedly walked over, smelling the slight fragrance. It made her feel hungry, and a desire to eat raw meat surged within her. Want to eat meat, want to drink blood. These thoughts made Lin Xiao's mind slightly confused, but she quickly reacted. Using perseverance to suppress the hunger, she leaned towards the corner of the wall. Squatting down, she used her fingernails to gently hook the blanket that was wrapped up into a ball. Once the blanket was opened, a very cute little face was revealed. But the eyes on the little face were closed, and the lips were very dry. Lin Xiao used her hands to carry the child, and with her sharp fingernails, she opened her fingers and gently touched the child's face. As a zombie, her skin had no temperature, but she could feel other temperatures, such as the temperature of the child's skin. Panicking, Lin Xiao felt that the child's body temperature was a little low. Moreover, the child's teeth were tightly clenched, both eyes were firmly closed, and her breathing was very light. Lowering her head, she pressed her ear against the child's chest to listen. She found that the child's heartbeat was very stable, and also very slow. Lin Xiao knew that the child was dying, but she couldn't leave it alone. She hurriedly carried the child, and walked out of the freezer. Looking at the child's dry lips, Lin Xiao knew that the child had not eaten or drunk for several days. An adult would not be able to survive without drinking water for 3 days. Not to mention that this was a child of a few years old. But the child in Lin Xiao's arms miraculously did not let out her last breath. Lin Xiao knew the identity of this child from Lu Tianyu's memory. She also knew that this child actually had superpowers, but her strength was not great. Moreover, she could not attack or control. But the child's will and the thought of not wanting to die made the power in her body tightly protect her vitality. So this child did not eat or drink for a few days, but still did not die. Although Lin Xiao carried the child out, she was at a loss and did not know what to do. Now the child's condition was very bad. If she did not drink some water or eat some food, this child was going to be finished. She looked around and it was all abandoned ruins. How could there be water? Suddenly, Lin Xiao remembered the clear Xiaomu in her mysterious space. She looked at the child in her arms. Suddenly, she raised her head and roared to the side. Roar, 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 don't come over. This roar was directed at the surrounding zombies who wanted to come over. After being roared by her, the surrounding zombies who wanted to come over bit by bit, they immediately retreated. Lin Xiao held the child and said strongly in her heart, "Go in." In the blink of an eye, the originally pitch-black abandoned street turned into a lush green grassland. Although the light inside was a little dim and hazy, she carried the child and quickly walked to the lake. She placed the child on the ground by the lake and turned to look at the grass by the lake. Then she found a very long and wide leaf and plucked it. He took the leaf and rolled it into the shape of a funnel. Lin Xiao took the funnel leaf and scooped some water from the lake. Then she gently placed it beside the child's closed mouth. Her other hand grabbed the child's chin and gently pinched it. The child's mouth opened, and Lin Xiao gently poured the water into the child's mouth. Lin Xiao knew that this child's name was Lingling. She was 5 years old this year and was that man's daughter. Chapter 11. Water was poured into Lingling's mouth. First it was still spilling out. However, after Lin Xiao fell a few more times, Lingling seemed to have woken up subconsciously. He swallowed it gently. Seeing that it was difficult for the child to drink water, Lin Xiao heaved a sigh of relief. After giving the child a few more mouthfuls of water, he couldn't get any more. Lin Xiao had no choice but to throw away the leaf, pick up the child and walk to the side. She found a dry patch of grass and put the child on the grass along with the blanket. After laying the child down, she placed the palm of her hand on the child's chest to feel his heart. His heartbeat was still very weak. However, it had already calmed down, unlike before. Sometimes long, sometimes short, sometimes high, sometimes low. Lin Xiao thought about it and decided to send the child back to her father. In any case, he would take it as compensation for the bad things this body had done in the past. In any case, the child was now in her hands, which was dangerous and inconvenient. She was a zombie and had an instinctive hunger for the living. He was afraid that one day, he would not be able to control himself and eat this child. Now that they had found the child, they still had to find that group of people. After finding that group of people, he had to secretly send the child back without being tempted by them. Although she thought it was very simple, she was a zombie. He was afraid that if he got close to those people, he would be attacked. Fortunately, her current appearance was not quite the same as the woman who used to wear thick makeup. Otherwise, when those people saw her, wasn't it like seeing a mouse and everyone was shouting to beat it up? Just as Lin Xiao was about to leave the space and find the child's father. Without any warning, the child's eyelids trembled slightly and he slowly opened his eyes. Lin Xiao did not realize that the child had woken up and was about to go out. His entire body exploded and he clenched his teeth. His body jumped to the side like a frightened cat, and he looked at the source of the sound with a frightened and alert expression. But when she looked, she saw that the child had already sat up. He was looking at her in horror, his bright eyes filled with fear and helplessness. Xiao Lin. And when Wu Yueling saw Lin Xiao's cat-like reaction, her eyes became a little puzzled. But in the next second, she suddenly realized something. In front of him was a zombie, a monster that would eat people. Daddy said these monsters will eat people. They especially like to eat children. Wu Yueling immediately became fearful. She stared at Lin Xiao with widened eyes. She wanted to cry and scream, but she didn't realize that she couldn't make a sound. His body stiffened involuntarily. She was going to be eaten. She would definitely be eaten. Lin Xiao was startled, but when he regained his senses, she patted her chest with her claws, but she did not notice that she actually did not have a heart. He was scared to death. He was scared to death. I almost got a heart attack from this little brat. After patting his chest a few times, Lin Xiao finally remembered. Holy shit. Fuck, I'm a zombie, why the hell would I be scared to death? When he looked up at the child, he saw that her eyes were wide open. His body stiffened as he stared at himself, his pupils constricting from time to time. It seemed that the moment he got close, the child would faint. Before Lin Xiao's thoughts disappeared, the little girl saw her scarred face. With a violent jolt, his eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the ground. Lin Xiao. Just look at her face and you're going to faint. Was her face that scary? She walked over, looked at the child's face, and found that it was a little green. It was obvious that she was quite frightened. Lin Xiao helped the child's body to a comfortable position, so that she could sleep well in the blanket. Then she stood up, turned around, and a thought flashed through her mind. Get out! Her eyes flashed and she looked again. As expected, she had already come out, and was still standing at the place where she had entered. Looking at the scattered zombies around, Lin Xiao had a feeling. These zombies seemed to understand her orders, and she could vaguely feel the thoughts of these zombies. There was only one. That was hungry. She was also hungry, especially when she had been with the little girl. Smelling the smell on her body, it made her want to bite the little girl. But thinking of the scene of the zombie riot just now, she had some doubts in her heart. At that time she was still thinking that if all the zombies rushed up, she could take advantage of the chaos to sneak in. But unexpectedly, all the zombies really rushed up, and she didn't know if they had heard her orders. And it attracted more and more zombies. Lin Xiao tried to look at a wandering zombie next to her, and stared at him. She silently said, "Look at me. Look at me. Look at me." Sure enough, the male zombie that she was staring at suddenly stopped swaying forward. Then she saw him slowly turn his head, looked at Lin Xiao, and then turned his whole body. His grayish-white eyes were looking at Lin Xiao blankly. Lin Xiao continued to stare at him and said in her heart, "Come over." Then the zombie swayed toward her. Lin Xiao was really surprised this time. This zombie could actually sense her thoughts and listen to her orders. Could it be that he had already evolved into a high-level zombie? So she could control these zombies without intelligence? Just as Lin Xiao was thinking, the zombie kept swaying in front of her. Then he stopped, still looking at her with a blank face. Lin Xiao glanced at him and waved at him. "Go away." Then the zombie continued to turn around and walk away in a daze. Lin Xiao continued to do the same test on another zombie, and found that the effect was the same. She was sure that she should have leveled up, but she didn't know how many levels she had leveled up. She also didn't know how the levels of zombies were calculated. She didn't think too much about it. After confirming that she could control zombies, she turned around and thought about the direction of the building in Lu Qianyu's memory where she had sex with that man. After recognizing the direction, she walked over there. She didn't know if that man was there, but he should be nearby. He would definitely be looking for her daughter there. It was night now, so it was very convenient for her to move. It was very convenient. Lin Xiao ran in that direction like a nimble shadow in the dark night. She ran very fast, but she didn't feel tired. So, after running for 2 hours, she arrived in front of the previous building. She didn't see any human aura, nor did she see anyone. She stood in a hidden corner and summoned a zombie. She tried to communicate with it with her mind. Are there any humans here? Question mark. The zombie just looked at her blankly, not understanding the meaning of her words. It didn't seem to understand at all. Roar. Human? Lin Xiao roared at the zombie. Oh. The zombie still looked at her blankly and didn't respond at all. Roar. Are there any humans here? Zombie. Chapter 12. She roared at the zombie for a while, but she couldn't get any response from it. It was as if she was talking to a cow. The cow could only understand simple commands, but it couldn't answer questions. She couldn't communicate at all. She sighed and could only give up the idea of asking zombies for directions. Hungry, suddenly, a thought entered Lin Xiao's mind. It wasn't her own thought, it seemed to be someone else's. Hungry, Lin Xiao felt a headache. It was as if she could sense a lot of information when she woke up. Those were other people's thoughts, not hers. She remembered yesterday or the day before yesterday, when a large amount of information rushed into her mind. She fainted from the pain. But now she could only feel a little, not as strong as before. The headache was also very light. She looked around. Who was it that was crying out for hunger? Hungry. At this moment the thought appeared again. At the same time, Lin Xiao also sensed the thought that was calling out for hunger. She suddenly realized that it was the zombie standing in front of her. Lin Xiao couldn't help but roar at it. Roar. Are you hungry? The zombie looked at her in confusion, then roared at her. Roar. Hungry. Lin Xiao tried to ask it again. Roar. Were there humans here? At this moment the zombie didn't respond to her. It just looked at her blankly like before. Sigh. Lin Xiao sighed. She waved her hand at it, giving an order for it to leave. As a result, the zombies reacted quickly and left. Lin Xiao could only continue to look around, thinking that she might as well walk around, see if she could find that group of people. Just as she was about to leave, a voice suddenly cried in her mind, scaring Lin Xiao. Fuck! Where did the crying come from? Lin Xiao's hair stood on end as he looked left and right, front and back. She couldn't see anything, nor could she sense any child crying around her. Wah, woo woo woo. Another childish cry sounded, still ringing in Lin Xiao's mind. This time Lin Xiao's expression suddenly changed. She immediately said in her mind, go in. As a result, a strange zombie that was originally standing in a hidden corner disappeared into thin air. As soon as Lin Xiao entered the space, the cries in his mind immediately turned into actual cries. Woo 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 wah wah wah. Woo. The child, who was sitting on the blanket, cried out of fear when she woke up to find herself alone in this strange space. As a result, after crying a few times, he suddenly saw a terrifying zombie appear out of thin air in front of him. The child was immediately startled. He immediately swallowed his cries and stopped. Upon seeing Lin Xiao, the little girl's eyes immediately widened. He looked at Lin Xiao in fear. His body stiffened and he couldn't help but tremble. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't open her mouth. His throat could not make a sound. Then she watched in horror as the zombie that she had seen before walked towards her. She's coming to eat me. She's going to eat me. I'm going to be eaten. Although the little girl was scared to death, she did not faint this time. Although Lin Xiao was tempted by Wu Yueling's smell to the point of drooling, she also heard Wu Yueling's thoughts. She looked at Wu Yueling, her eyes staring at her in horror and her lips tightly pursed. Her body was stiff and she didn't dare to move. Lin Xiao tried to move her feet. She saw Wu Yueling tremble violently and then quickly curl into a ball. She hugged her legs and buried her face in her knees. Daddy! I'm going to be eaten. Daddy, come and save me. Daddy. Hearing the little girl shouting in her mind, Lin Xiao could only retreat slightly. After thinking for a while, she turned around and left her space. After a while, Wu Yueling realized that she seemed to be fine. Why hadn't the zombie come to bite her? She curiously raised her head and saw that the place where the zombie was standing was now empty. Wu Yueling was startled. She looked left and right abruptly. The zombie was nowhere to be seen. Why did it disappear? Where did it go? It was just standing there, looking like it was going to eat her. Looking left and right, she didn't see the zombie. Wu Yueling slightly breathed a sigh of relief. But after a while, she pursed her lips and was about to cry. There was no one here. How terrible. Where did Daddy go? Why didn't he come to find her? She wanted Daddy. Daddy. After Lin Xiao came out of her space, she looked at the sky. She didn't have a watch, so she didn't know what time it was. She could only judge from the starlight shining down from the sky that it was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the middle of the night. She looked around and suddenly saw the tall building again. Her dark eyes lit up. She turned around and hid under the cover of the night. She quietly ran to the door of the building. His movements were soundless, like a cat that had its legs erect. Only her clothes made a slight sound in the air. This building had about 30 or 40 floors. In the absence of an elevator, she could only climb the stairs with her legs. The surrounding zombies, as long as she came close, they would slightly stay away from her or turn around to not look at her. Ordinary zombies couldn't climb stairs because their knees were very hard. Only zombies that had evolved to level 1 could do it, like Lin Xiao now. They could run flexibly and walk normally up and down the stairs. Since Lin Xiao woke up, she hadn't seen any zombies above level 1 in Lu Tianyu's memory. Because zombies evolved very slowly, they didn't have any intelligence. They only relied on their instinctive hunger to find food. Only a few evolved zombies would be slightly better. But zombies from level 1 to level 2 also didn't have intelligence. They were just a group of agile and extremely fast. They only knew how to eat humans. Intelligent zombies would only appear when they reached level 3 or above. Ordinary zombies, if they ate a lot of human meat or could eat the meat of superhumans, only then would they evolve into level 1 or level 2 zombies. To evolve from level 2 to level 3, it was especially difficult. Out of 100 level 2 zombies, not even one could evolve into level 3. As for Lin Xiao, she just opened her eyes. She had already evolved from an ordinary zombie to level 3 or above at a very fast speed. She was even about to evolve into a level 4 zombie. Because she had memories and a soul, she naturally wouldn't be lacking in intelligence. But when it came to climbing stairs, even if she became a zombie, Lin Xiao was also a little dizzy from the layers and circles of stairs. Although she didn't feel tired, nor did she feel like a living person's heart was about to explode and she couldn't catch her breath. But she felt dizzy. Dizzy. After climbing to more than 10 floors, Lin Xiao felt so dizzy that she felt suffocated. Damn! Wasn't she a zombie? Why did she feel dizzy and suffocated? Could it be that she couldn't even be happy as a zombie? When Lin Xiao reached the 20th floor, he stopped. She complained in her heart as she walked to the window at the side. This was already the 20th floor. At this height, she should be able to see something. Chapter 13. Lin Xiao walked to a window next to the stairs of this building and looked out. In the eyes of a normal person, there was only darkness outside. The buildings, plants, and trees on the ground were just patches of dark shadows in the night. But in Lin Xiao's eyes, she could see it clearly. Although there was no color in the eyes of zombies, Lin Xiao's eyes were a little different from those of ordinary zombies. She stared with a pair of eyes that were darker than the shadows in the night. She glanced left and right at the places that could be seen outside the window. After looking for a long time, she didn't see any light. And it was estimated that those people wouldn't make too bright a light to attract attention. After looking for a while, she didn't see anything. Lin Xiao's eyes flashed, and she changed her method. She slightly raised her chin and closed her eyes. She used her nose to carefully smell the air again and again. Lin Xiao felt that her nose was more sensitive than a dog's. So she sniffed the smell in the wind for a while on the tall building. Sure enough, she smelled something different. The rotten smell of zombies was the strongest, and there were some strange smells from some plants and some smell from some mutated animals. Although they were very light, faintly mixed in the air. Now Lin Xiao could slowly distinguish the smell, especially the smell of living people and zombies. But Lin Xiao didn't know how far her nose could smell, so she sniffed for a long time from such a high place. There were all kinds of smells, but there was no smell of living people. She was unwilling to give up and ran around this floor, and then ran to another direction. She found a window and directly removed the glass on the window. Then she stuck her head out of the window and sniffed hard. In the end, Lin Xiao still didn't smell anything upstairs. She couldn't help but feel a little strange. Didn't that man send people out to find his daughter? Why there was no smell of living people in this area? If she couldn't find Tiny's family, did she have to raise her? Thinking of this, Lin Xiao was a little troubled. She was now a zombie, and no matter how hungry she was, she wouldn't die. However, the tiny tot in her space was a living person. She was still a child. She had to eat, especially a child. If she wasn't careful, she might get sick or something. That would be bad. Thinking of Tiny Tot, Lin Xiao suddenly realized that he could not sense anything. I could hear her crying before. It can't be that something happened to Xiao Budian, right? As soon as this thought flashed through his mind, Lin Xiao hurriedly entered the space. Her vision blurred, and she appeared in the still misty space. There was silence all around, not a single sound could be heard. Lin Xiao looked around and saw Wu Yueling's small figure lying on the ground with the blanket wrapped around her. Her heart sank and she hurriedly leaned over. Suppressing his urge to eat, he squatted down and observed the child's expression. The little guy's face was very pale, and his lips were also very pale. His eyes were dark green. Lin Xiao wanted to reach out to touch the child's forehead, but when he reached out, he saw his shiny black fingernails. She paused. Zombies' teeth and nails are carrying the virus. Like this turned into her black, sharp and sharp. The toxicity must be even more terrifying. You can't touch the child's skin with your nails. I wonder if this claw can be retracted? Lin Xiao looked at her nails and thought about it. Suddenly, she felt a strange feeling on the bones of her fingers. When he took a closer look, he saw that her fingernails were slowly whitening and shortening. Then she looked at her 5 fingers. They no longer had sharp nails. Instead, they had become the same as ordinary people's nails. She looked at it blankly, then raised her other hand and looked at it. The other hand still had the same sharp black nails as before. Could it be that her nails could change according to her thoughts? Lin Xiao thought about it uncertainly. Then he pointed at the hand that hadn't changed, and stared at the fingertips of her 5 fingers. She said silently in her heart, "Change back. Change back. Change back." Sure enough, as she expected, her other hand slowly turned into an ordinary person's. The dark claws had disappeared. Lin Xiao looked at the change of her nails and was silent for a while. Only then did he try to touch the child's forehead with his finger. The skin on the child's forehead was cold, not the temperature of a normal person. Lin Xiao frowned slightly and immediately withdrew her hand. She didn't know if it was awakened by the touch of her fingers. Just after Lin Xiao withdrew her hand, the child's eyelids suddenly trembled and then slowly opened. Oh no! Lin Xiao was shocked and secretly thought that it was not good. He hurriedly stood up and in a flash, appeared 5 meters away from the child on the other side. She looked at her nervously. This was a completely subconscious action, because the child had screamed and almost fainted when he saw her. Now he suddenly opened his eyes and saw himself standing next to her. Wouldn't he be scared to death by her? Sure enough, just as the child opened his eyes, he turned his head and looked around blankly. When he saw her, he suddenly became sober. Suddenly she became sober. Her pair of big, watery eyes suddenly widened. At this moment there was no spirit in them. And when he saw Lin Xiao, he suddenly opened his eyes wide. Instantly there was fear inside. But this time he didn't scream loudly. She just bit her lips tightly. She stared at Lin Xiao without blinking. Lin Xiao stood 5 meters away and looked at her helplessly. She couldn't do anything to children. This kind of child was the most immature, willful, mischievous, and hard to coax. When he cried, it was earth-shattering. She couldn't stand the crying of a child. She came. She came. She came to eat me. This zombie is going to eat me. Daddy. Daddy. Where are you? Come quickly. Come and save Lingling. Why don't you come and save Lingling? Just when Lin Xiao didn't know what to do, she suddenly felt a strong thought. The thought was filled with fear, despair, panic, and other negative emotions. At the same time, she also felt the thought in this thought. This was obviously what the child was thinking right now. But then the thought gradually weakened. I'm going to die. Daddy. I'm going to be eaten. Daddy. Daddy. Lin Xiao was shocked and quickly noticed her eyes. Sure enough, the spirit in the child's eyes was dimming. What to do? What to do? What to do? Lin Xiao was anxious and almost scratched her head. She already felt that the child had lost the desire to live, and thought that she was going to be eaten. Maybe if she left the space now, she could give her a break. But this was not a solution. Because the child hadn't eaten for a few days, his body was now failing. His mind was already in a state of no desire to live, so he could only speed up the necrosis of his body. Chapter 14. Lin Xiao was so anxious that she didn't know what to do. She also knew that she couldn't get close to the child at this time, so she had to take 2 steps back to see if she could get a reaction from the child. She actually wanted to take the child to the lake and let her drink some water. Although she had bathed in the lake before, she didn't know if the virus in her body had been infected by the water. But thinking about it, when the child came in, she drank a little too. He also drank a little, but he didn't seem to be affected by it. It meant that there was nothing wrong with the water. However, just as Lin Xiao stepped back, Wu Yueling's eyes suddenly flashed. His eyes, which were originally dim, actually lit up slightly. The fear and despair in her eyes strangely disappeared a little. Then she looked at Lin Xiao with confusion. Children were actually very sensitive. When she saw Lin Xiao's scary zombie appearance, her first reaction was fear. But this was not the first time she saw Lin Xiao. It was the second and third time. She was originally afraid, but when Lin Xiao stepped back just now, the feeling of fear disappeared. She suddenly remembered why the zombie didn't bite her. Although Wu Yueling was still very young, she had seen zombies before, and it had left a shadow on her, which became her current psychological problem. But in her memory, zombies would pounce on people as soon as they saw them. They would open their mouth and bite. It was very scary. But why did this zombie? Why didn't it pounce on her? And why was it standing so far away from her? It seemed to be afraid to get close to her. Thinking of this, Wu Yueling's little head suddenly became tangled. For a moment she didn't feel so scared. She suddenly remembered that the last time she saw this zombie jumping away from her, it was as if it was startled by her own scream. The scene of Lin Xiao being scared by her sudden scream last time appeared in Wu Yueling's mind. Lin Xiao was carefully observing Wu Yueling's every move. At this time she also noticed the change of expression on her face. At the same time she also faintly sensed the child's emotions. The previous fear and despair were no longer so strong. Instead, it seemed to be suppressed by curiosity. Children's psychology was strange. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao also felt relieved. Now it was all right. The little one was no longer afraid of her. Since this was the case, the rest should be much easier. Lin Xiao sensed Wu Yueling's thoughts and suddenly had a thought. She could control zombies and sense other people's thoughts. Then, could his thoughts be conveyed to others? Or could she pass on her thoughts to the little guy in front of her? If he could, at the thought of this possibility, Lin Xiao felt as if his heart that did not have a heartbeat was beating faster. Alright, that was all her misconception. She did not have a heartbeat. Lin Xiao started to act the moment she thought of it. She looked into Wu Yueling's eyes. Under her puzzled gaze, he suddenly sat cross-legged on the ground. Then he looked at Wu Yueling from afar. What was she trying to do? Is she not going to bite me? Is she not going to eat me? Wu Yueling, who was gradually losing her sense of crisis, became more and more curious. Seeing that Lin Xiao didn't move closer to him, he sat down on the ground instead. These thoughts flashed through her small mind. Of course, Lin Xiao could feel her thoughts. Kids who were only a few years old basically wouldn't hide their thoughts. It was obvious from her expression. The two of them looked at each other from afar for a while. Lin Xiao suddenly raised her hand and waved at Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling. What was she doing? Wu Yueling was very puzzled by Lin Xiao's actions. She moved her eyes and moved her body again. At this time she felt very uncomfortable lying down. So she slowly used her hands to support herself and sat up. But her eyes were still very vigilant in Lin Xiao's direction. Ha ha. Lin Xiao heard a low gasp from her throat. In fact, she wanted to speak to Wu Yueling. Lingling? Lingling? She concentrated her thoughts and called out to Wu Yueling in her heart and mouth at the same time. But she was a zombie, her tongue was stiff. So her voice became a strange ha-ha sound. Wu Yueling. She tried calling out twice, but saw that Wu Yueling was only looking at her strangely. There was no other change in her eyes. Lin Xiao sighed in disappointment. Just as she finished sighing, Wu Yueling's expression changed slightly. But because Lin Xiao turned her head to look at the lake, she didn't notice the change in Wu Yueling's eyes. Since she couldn't use her thoughts to communicate, she could only use her actions to communicate. After Lin Xiao looked at the lake, she suddenly had an idea. She slowly stood up. Seeing her stand up, Wu Yueling became nervous again. But then she saw that the zombie in front of her wasn't coming towards her. Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao walking towards the lake. She curiously thought, "What is she doing?" Lin Xiao walked to the lake and picked a few long grass leaves. She held them in her hands and flexibly folded them a few times. Then a small green dragonfly appeared in her hands. She put the small dragonfly down, picked a few leaves and continued to fold them in her hands. Then a small funnel appeared in her hands. She then pinched the edge of the funnel with her hands. She put it in the lake and poured a little water in. The lake water was still as clear as before. The water poured into the funnel that Lin Xiao had weaved. Surprisingly, it didn't leak down. She took it and put it in the funnel. Lin Xiao held the funnel filled with water in one hand and picked up the grass dragonfly in the other. Then she slowly walked towards Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling originally saw her doing something by the lake. She was staring at her with her eyes wide open. Suddenly seeing her stand up and walk towards her, she was immediately startled. Her body subconsciously shrank back. Seeing her reaction, Lin Xiao immediately stopped in her tracks. She stood there motionless, but she slightly stretched out the things in her hands. Sure enough, the little guy's attention was immediately attracted by the grass dragonfly and funnel in her hands. She didn't know why, but the little guy was very interested in this kind of grass-woven things. This grass dragonfly was made by Lin Xiao's grandfather when she was a child in the countryside. She didn't expect that she would use it to coax the little guy. Lin Xiao let her look at the grass dragonfly. Seeing that her eyes didn't reject her, she lifted her legs and took 2 steps towards her. Her movement immediately attracted the little guy's attention again. But this time she didn't seem so nervous. She just curiously looked at her eyes and looked at the grass dragonfly in her hands. Lin Xiao saw her reaction and knew that it was enough. So she lifted her legs again and slowly walked over. The little guy looked at her nervously and vigilantly, but her eyes couldn't help but glance at the grass dragonfly in Lin Xiao's hands. Lin Xiao slowly walked to a meter in front of her, leaving a little gap between them. This distance gave the little guy a little sense of security, so she didn't reject her so much. At the same time, she could see the grass dragonfly in her hands clearly. Chapter 15. Lin Xiao held out all the things in his hands in front of her. Unwilling to give up, he gently called out to her twice, "Hey hey! Ho ho! Lingling! Lingling!" At this time, she saw Wu Yueling's expression change. Xiao Budian's expression froze for a moment, then her eyes moved away from the grass dragonfly in her hands. She first looked left in confusion, then turned her head to look right. When she didn't see anything, she turned her head back. She looked straight into Lin Xiao's eyes, which were full of confusion and confusion. When Lin Xiao saw her reaction, she was also slightly stunned. Her heart moved slightly and then she became happy. But this time, Wu Yueling's reaction was unexpected. When Wu Yueling heard her voice again, she stared at her fiercely, her expression a little stiff. She just kept staring at her, not making a sound. Even the thoughts in her heart were gone. Lin Xiao was a little confused. Did she hear it? Or did she not hear it? Why did her expression suddenly freeze? Or did my scream scare her? In fact, from Lu Tianyu's memory, she felt that this child didn't like to talk. She was very introverted, except for her father. No one else was allowed to approach her. This time she was kidnapped by Lu Tianyu because Lu Tianyu used Wu Chengyue as an excuse to trick the little girl to the side when no one was paying attention. He directly knocked her out and carried her away. As for why the daughter of one of the rulers of the base was so easily kidnapped, and it was because Lu Tianyu had a good backer. Another person in the base who was in charge of one of the capitals was also helping her. However, Wu Yueling's stiff expression soon relaxed, but she still looked at Lin Xiao with vigilance. She looked at the grass dragonfly in Lin Xiao's hand. At this time, Lin Xiao immediately took advantage of her attention on the grass dragonfly and handed it to her. At this time, Wu Yueling was not afraid of Lin Xiao. She had seen many zombies. Although they were ugly and disgusting, as long as they didn't bite her and eat her flesh, she didn't care. Looking at the grass dragonfly that Lin Xiao handed to her, Wu Yueling already knew that it was for her. She endured for a while, then slowly and leisurely stretched out a hand from under the blanket, carefully taking the grass dragonfly from Lin Xiao's hand. Lin Xiao then brought the funnel that had water slowly seeping out from the bottom to Wu Yueling's mouth, indicating for her to drink a little. However, Wu Yueling just looked at the water silently. She didn't open her mouth to drink, but she didn't avoid it either. Lin Xiao could only hold it up patiently, not daring to relax. After a while, Lin Xiao silently counted 10 to 20 seconds in his heart. Only then did Wu Yueling move. She gently and tentatively put her mouth on the funnel in Lin Xiao's hand and opened her mouth slightly. He took a sip of the water that had already seeped through half of it. He felt that the water was a little sweet. Only then did he continue to drink. Lin Xiao helped her drink the water with great difficulty, and he was almost sweating profusely. Although her zombie body wouldn't sweat. This little ancestor finally drank water. My heart is so tired. She cursed silently in her heart. Then she thought of another question. Did the child not feel hungry anymore? Because he was too hungry. If she drank some water now, it would probably stimulate the activity of her stomach. After she finished drinking the water in the leaf funnel, Lin Xiao turned around and filled a full funnel for her. He continued to feed her until she finished drinking. Seeing her finish the water, Lin Xiao let out a sigh of relief. He stuffed the funnel into her hand and then stood up. He walked a few steps to the side and his mind turned. He was out of the space. Seeing Lin Xiao's figure suddenly disappear in front of her, Wu Yueling's eyes widened. She stared at the place where Lin Xiao disappeared for a while, and suddenly turned her head to search around. But after looking around, she didn't see this strange zombie. There was no one else in this place except for herself. The surroundings were quiet, and there wasn't even any wind. Suddenly, a strong sense of uneasiness appeared in Wu Yueling's heart. She opened her eyes wide, and tried to search around frantically, but there was still nothing. There was no trace of that zombie. Wu Yueling's round eyes suddenly turned red. But she didn't cry out, and just bit her lips tightly. Her hands also tightly held the grass dragonfly that Lin Xiao gave her, and her body curled up into a ball. Little Wu Yueling didn't notice that her originally thirsty and hungry stomach, after drinking the lake water that Lin Xiao gave her, she was no longer hungry. So her current situation wasn't as bad as Lin Xiao imagined, and her spirit was slowly recovering. After Lin Xiao came out of the space, she was still in the same building as before. She sniffed the air and smelled fruit in the air. She immediately turned around and walked in the direction of the stairs. Lin Xiao suddenly found that her nose was getting better and better. Shit! Was she going to become a dog? It seemed that this zombie skill was also very useful. While thinking, she ran down the stairs as fast as she could. She just wanted to find food for the little one as soon as possible. Otherwise, before she could send her to her father, she would starve to death, and that would be a great sin. Thinking about that, she ran faster and faster, and the speed of her going down the stairs also changed from a few steps to a few jumps. She almost jumped an entire floor with just a few steps. Lin Xiao noticed that her footsteps became more and more regular, and her speed also became faster and faster. She found that her feet were more flexible than before, and the strength of her legs seemed to have increased, but also became a lot lighter. Jumping down from 5 or 6 steps, she didn't feel any tremors from the impact of gravity. At this time, Lin Xiao felt like a cat, agile and light. It took a long time to climb up the stairs, but she jumped down very quickly. Not long after, she came out of the building. Looking at the sky, it was still very dark. But Lin Xiao knew that it shouldn't be far from dawn. She turned around and quickly ran in the direction of the fruity smell. Lin Xiao was an impatient person, so when she could run, she would never walk. Even when he couldn't run, he would still walk with big strides and walk very fast. So she ran in the night again. Moreover, she was trying to see how fast she could run. In her own field of vision, she focused on her legs and the road in front of her. She listened to the slight whistling sound of the wind blowing past her ears. If there was an outsider here, they would see how fast she was. She ran like a flash of lightning, and her speed was already 2 or 3 times faster than normal. But Lin Xiao didn't know this. She only knew that she was getting more and more excited as she ran. She felt that the movement of her feet seemed to have entered a regular state. As long as she didn't plan to stop, her legs would continue to run forward habitually. Chapter 16. After running for half an hour, Lin Xiao's speed had risen to another level. But she didn't know it yet. When she stopped in a field of mutated strawberries, she felt a little stuffy in her chest. He didn't know if it was because he had run too long, or if it was because he had run too fast. But it didn't seem to affect her body much. So Lin Xiao didn't care about it anymore. She stood on the ridge of the field next to the field of strawberries. Under her feet was a dense and crowded field of green strawberries. Why didn't anyone find this place? Because these strawberries obviously looked mutated. In the current apocalypse, 60% to 70% of the plants on the land had been infected. They were either necrotic or mutated. Generally, mutated plants weren't poisonous. They just became cannibals. Like monsters that had become spirits, many mutated plants had become terrible killers. That was why humans didn't dare to go near places with large areas of plants. Compared to parks and forests outside the mountains, the mutated strawberries in front of Lin Xiao were 3 to 4 times bigger than normal strawberries. So they covered the whole field of strawberries. As for the strawberries, they were a strange green with red spots on the bottom. However, there was a strong rotting stench permeating the area. Because of the appearance of the mutated strawberries, the survivors after the apocalypse, they all went around it and didn't even dare to go near it. Not to mention tasting it. Of course, Lin Xiao couldn't see the color changes, but from the appearance it was still very abnormal. However, she could smell a faint strawberry fragrance from the stench. She was also very confused at this time. Looking at the appearance of this mutated strawberry, it should be inedible in theory. But why, after she smelled the hidden fragrance? Why did she have a hunch that these strawberries weren't poisonous? Although Lin Xiao was very confused, she didn't hesitate to go straight into the strawberry field. The leaves of the strawberry had already reached her calf. She bent down and reached out to pick a big and plump strawberry. She put it to her nose and sniffed. The stench was still there, but so was the fragrance. The two smells mixed together and became strange. This smell made Lin Xiao's nose a little itchy. Lin Xiao held the strawberry away from him and rubbed his nose with his other hand. He wondered if the strawberries were really edible. Suddenly, she thought of the little rabbit and the litter of mice that she had placed in the space. Turning around, Lin Xiao disappeared with the strawberry, which was as big as a pear. It was as if there were no zombies in this strawberry field. His vision blurred, and then he saw a familiar expanse of whiteness. Lin Xiao subconsciously looked for Tiny Tot. Sure enough, the child was still in his original position, but he was curled up into a ball and squatting. He was still awake. Lin Xiao was a little surprised. Her sudden appearance did not attract Wu Yueling's attention because she was squatting sideways. She was playing with the grass dragonfly that Lin Xiao had given her. The blanket wrapped around her whole body, and she crouched there with her head down. It looked like a chubby ball. Lin Xiao did not disturb her. Instead, she turned her head and looked around. His eyes carefully observed the lush grass, and his ears stretched out to listen for any movement. Sure enough, after a while she heard a little noise. There was no wind in this space, so the grass would not make any noise. This was also the reason why Wu Yueling was afraid to stay here alone after Lin Xiao suddenly disappeared. It was because it was too quiet and too spacious here. Lin Xiao took a breath in her heart and walked quietly to the place where the sound came from. What she said about taking a breath in her heart was just her imagination. Her body's functions were already dead, so where could she get a single breath? Lin Xiao walked quietly to the grass. Her footsteps were silent, and there was no vibration when she stepped on the ground. So when she walked quietly to the place where the sound came from, she saw a fist-sized rabbit with its back facing her. It was squatting in the grass, holding a handful of tender green grass and eating it happily. The rabbit was concentrating on eating grass, and it didn't notice the zombie behind it. It didn't notice it at all. Lin Xiao gently leaned over, holding the strawberry in her left hand. She stretched out her right hand and bent down. When her palm slowly reached 10 centimeters behind the rabbit, she suddenly pressed it forward. The little rabbit was startled by her sudden grab. Then it turned pale with fright and struggled in panic, and then it squeaked. Lin Xiao picked it up and watched it twisting and struggling in her hand. The rabbit's scream immediately attracted Wu Yueling's attention. As soon as she turned her head, she saw the zombie that gave her water standing in the grass. The blades of grass were not even above her small feet and knees. She could only see her body above her thighs. When Wu Yueling saw Lin Xiao, she couldn't help standing up. There was a flash of surprise in her eyes. She turned around and looked straight at Lin Xiao. She was no longer afraid of Lin Xiao, because this zombie didn't want to eat her, nor did it seem to want to hurt her. Lin Xiao walked out with the rabbit in her hand. She didn't walk to Wu Yueling. Instead, she walked to a clean place by the lake and sat cross-legged on the ground. Then she held the rabbit and let it wriggle in her hand. After a while, the rabbit slowly calmed down. It seemed to know that no matter how it wriggled, it was useless, or maybe it was too tired. After it calmed down, Lin Xiao picked up the strawberry in her other hand. Then she put it in front of the rabbit to see its reaction. She didn't know whether the rabbit liked strawberries or not, but even if it didn't eat it, she would also put a piece in its mouth to see if it would be poisoned. Maybe the smell of the strawberry was no longer pungent. The rabbit's reaction was to shrink suddenly. Then it turned its nose and mouth to the other side, trying to stay away from the strawberry. Lin Xiao continued to hold the strawberry patiently. She didn't immediately put a piece in its mouth. Instead, she waited to see if the rabbit could smell the other smell of the strawberry. However, the rabbit didn't smell the faint fragrance. After a long time, it didn't turn its head. Lin Xiao had to put the strawberry down and press the rabbit to the ground so that it couldn't move. She used her finger to pick a piece of the strawberry. Then she put this small piece directly into the rabbit's mouth. She pinched its mouth and stabbed the strawberry into the rabbit's throat. The rabbit was stuck in the strawberry's throat and couldn't spit it out. It swallowed it subconsciously. After Lin Xiao stuffed the strawberry into it, she continued to observe the rabbit. Then she realized that other than the few times when the rabbit's hind legs were forcefully stuffed in the strawberry, it hadn't had any reaction. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. A minute passed. Lin Xiao shook the little rabbit. She found that it was still alive, as if it wasn't going to die. I wonder if it's a chronic poison? There's no reaction now. Maybe after a while the time is up. Is it going to be poisoned? Lin Xiao thought and suddenly swung her hand, throwing the rabbit into the grass at the side. Then, she saw Wu Yueling standing silently 3 meters behind her. Chapter 17. Lin Xiao was speechless. The rabbit was thrown onto the grass by her and instantly came to life. With a shudder, it turned around and stepped into the grass, disappearing. Wu Yueling stood far away and kept staring at Lin Xiao's movements. At first, she thought that the zombie was going to eat the cute little rabbit, and she was nervous for the little rabbit. However, she slowly realized that it wasn't the case. She also saw that the zombie was holding a strawberry-like fruit in its hand. Then she saw that the strange zombie was actually feeding this strawberry to the rabbit. Her father said that the plants outside were all mutated. They were all poisonous. Only the plants in the base could be eaten and were not poisonous. Moreover, she knew a normal strawberry was bright red and was 2 or 3 times smaller than the one she saw now. It was very small. But now she saw that the color of the strawberry in the zombie's hand was too strange. Her father said that the expression of mutated plants was all in appearance and color. So, she was very sure that this was a mutated strawberry. Unexpectedly, this zombie actually fed this poisonous mutated strawberry to the little rabbit. Would the rabbit be poisoned to death? The little rabbit didn't seem to want to touch the strawberry, but a small piece was forced into it. Wu Yueling suddenly felt that this zombie had become a little scary. So when Lin Xiao saw Wu Yueling hugged her blanket and retreated 2 meters away. Lin Xiao was speechless. If she was afraid, why did she get so close just now? Lin Xiao rolled her eyes in her heart. The zombie didn't understand the mind of a child. Seeing that the rabbit ran away, Lin Xiao wanted to wait for half an hour to check on the situation of the rabbit. She took the mutated strawberry with a small hole in it, stood up and walked to the lake. She directly put the strawberry in the lake to wash it. After washing it, she picked it up and looked at it. Suddenly, she was about to take a bite, but when her teeth had already touched the strawberry, she paused. Lin Xiao was stunned for a moment. Then she closed her mouth. She only sniffed the strawberry with her nose. She found something strange. The stench on the strawberry was gone, or rather disappeared. Only a faint sweet smell was left. Huh? Why was the stench gone? Lin Xiao sniffed a few more times in confusion. She found that the pungent stench was really gone. How did it disappear? She was a little confused. But soon she cheered up. Without the stench, it was much easier to accept. Thinking of this, she immediately stuffed the strawberry into her mouth and took a bite. As a zombie, of course, her mouth couldn't taste anything. However, the texture was still there. The strawberry's flesh was tender and juicy, soft and refreshing. The texture was similar to a real strawberry, but the flesh was thicker and juicier. Lin Xiao sighed in disappointment. It was a pity that his tongue could not taste anything. As for whether it was poisonous or not, she didn't really care. Because she was a zombie, poison wouldn't be able to kill her. She was already infected with the virus, so the virus on the fruit had no effect on her. However, the change in the smell of the strawberries made her a little concerned. But he had to see the rabbit's reaction first before he could make a decision. Although rabbits were also mutated animals, they were different from mutated plants. Mutated animals did not carry the virus. Only zombies that had turned into zombies would carry the zombie virus. Like the rabbit, a living mutated animal with flesh and blood. It was just like the human ability users, although some things had changed. But the physiology of the body hadn't changed. So, the living mutated animals, their flesh and blood were no different from before. The only difference was that their abilities had evolved. Wu Yueling kept staring at Lin Xiao. Seeing that Lin Xiao, a zombie, was eating mutated strawberries. Naturally, she knew that she wouldn't be infected by the virus. She just felt that it was strange. As a zombie, shouldn't you eat people and bite people? Should you pounce on a living person? Even if she was young, she wasn't stupid at all. And she grew up after the apocalypse. Her father had taught her a lot of things. She was more familiar with the apocalypse. Was she also hungry? It was hungry, but it didn't come to eat her. To eat a strawberry? However, even if Wu Yueling's IQ wasn't low, at this moment, a child couldn't understand Lin Xiao's actions. Not to mention her, even if an adult came. Seeing the zombie's actions, he was also dumbfounded. Who had ever seen a zombie eat strawberries instead of humans? Even if this was an intelligent zombie, it couldn't change its instinct to eat human flesh. What the hell was this strawberry eating thing? When Wu Yueling looked at Lin Xiao with a puzzled face, Lin Xiao also looked at Wu Yueling with some doubts. Influenced by the occupational disease she had before her rebirth, her observation behavior, she would always do it unconsciously, waiting for her to react. When she reacted, Lin Xiao found that she had already observed the surroundings unconsciously. She imprinted all the images and details in her mind, so she just needed to scan the images again and compare them with the ones in her mind. Then she would find out what was wrong. Now Lin Xiao could see that Wu Yueling was not right. This child had a hungry and weak look before, but now she didn't look like someone who had starved for a few days. And she was a child. At this moment, although Wu Yueling was standing 7 or 8 meters away from her, Lin Xiao could still see her face clearly. There was still no color on her face, but her eyes had regained their brightness. Although she was still looking at her with vigilance, there was curiosity and doubt in her eyes, as well as some desire for knowledge. The original weakness and dullness had disappeared, and there were no negative emotions such as despair and fear. The child's changes were like the face of the sky, crying and laughing when she wanted to. There was no warning at all. This little guy was clearly scared to death of him before, but now he could approach him out of curiosity. She didn't know what had happened to this little one, and she was worried that she was going to die. But now she was standing in front of her again. "You've already taken my grass dragonfly, why are you still hiding?" Lin Xiao could also see that this child seemed to be quite smart. She could distinguish between good and bad people, and she wouldn't believe everything others said. In Lu Tianyu's memory, Wu Yueling originally hated Lu Tianyu. When Lu Tianyu lied to her, she didn't believe it at all. But Lu Tianyu learned some secret information about Wu Chongyue from Yang Chao, which was why Wu Yueling was dubious. But halfway through, Wu Yueling quickly realized that something was wrong, so she turned around and ran. In the end, how could she outrun Lu Tianyu? So she was directly knocked unconscious. Chapter 18. Lin Xiao looked at her and subconsciously chewed on it. The pulp quickly melted and she swallowed it directly into her stomach. Unfortunately, it didn't taste good or fill her stomach. After one bite, she didn't want to eat anymore. Lin Xiao looked at the strawberry in her hand that she had bitten off and threw it into the grass beside her. She looked at the grass dragonfly in Wu Yueling's hand and thought for a moment. She suddenly raised her hand and waved at her, meaning for her to come over. However, when Wu Yueling saw her waving, she suddenly turned around. Then she ran away like a wisp of smoke. Lin Xiao. Alright, this little one didn't want to come over. Then she would play by herself. Lin Xiao glanced in the direction that Wu Yueling ran and saw that she had hidden in the grass. She didn't know if she was afraid of insects. She turned around and walked to the grass and picked a few long blades of grass. As long as the leaves of these grasses grew, they would be very hard and have small thorns on the sides. If she scratched hard on a person's skin, she could make a thin cut. But Lin Xiao's hands wouldn't because she was a zombie. She plucked a few leaves and knitted them into a bundle. She made a frog. Then she made a ball, a butterfly, and other little things. After she finished, she put it in the open space. She glanced at Wu Yueling, who was staring at her in the distance, and then turned around. She left the space. She didn't know where this space came from. She didn't know if it was brought by her soul, or if it was in Lu Tianyu's body. It was just that she didn't stimulate it and it was stimulated by herself. She didn't know what this space was used for, but it could be used to collect things or plant plants. As soon as she left the space, Lin Xiao found a place to sit down. Looking at the sky, it was almost dawn. She found that she didn't feel sleepy even if she didn't need to sleep. But did zombies really not need to sleep? Looking at the zombies still wandering in the city in the middle of the night, Lin Xiao felt that she really didn't need to sleep. This strawberry field wasn't far from the city, so there were zombies wandering nearby. It was just that their numbers were scattered and not dense. She thought about how she could get to the southern Cloud Island base as soon as possible. Right. She should have found a car that she could drive, but she didn't know why she had forgotten about it. Perhaps he was so focused on finding food that he forgot about it. Then there was the matter of Wu Yueling. She was not in the mood to think about it for a while. It seemed that after filling his stomach, he would have to get a car first. There were many cars in District SC, and there were all kinds of cars. He just didn't know if it could still be opened. The gasoline in the gas station had probably been robbed long ago. She didn't know if there were any left for her to pick up. He touched his own stomach and felt that it was full of bumps and hollows. This feeling was very strange. As a normal person, the physiological knowledge of the body had long been deeply ingrained. With his current appearance, if he was a human, he would definitely die. Even if he didn't die, he would be tortured to death by the pain. But she didn't feel anything, Lin Xiao thought happily. Fortunately, she had turned into a zombie. Otherwise she would have died from the pain. She raised her nose and sniffed around. There was no aroma that could arouse her appetite, and there was nothing that she wanted to eat. I can only look around. Although she wouldn't starve to death without food, it was very uncomfortable to be stimulated by this feeling of hunger. In any case, it would be good to find a mouse as a snack. At the same time, she would see if she could find Wu Changyue's group and return Tiny. She didn't need to worry about taking care of the child. Lin Xiao stood up and turned to leave. After leaving the strawberry field, she walked towards the city. But she didn't walk far before she suddenly stopped. Her ears twitched, and then she continued to walk forward. After walking for a while, she just walked to a road that looked like a factory area. She abruptly jumped to the side and quickly rolled on the ground. She knelt with one leg on the ground and both hands propped up. He stared vigilantly at the monster that had suddenly appeared on the roof of the two-story factory building, and was silently pouncing towards him. Although it was called a monster, it was actually humanoid. It seemed to be a high-level zombie. Its head could no longer be seen as human. Its eyes were pitch black, and like Lin Xiao, there was no white in its eyes. His entire eye was a deep black, but it shone with a strange light. The nose could still be seen, but the mouth was cracked wide. It split from the left ear to the right ear. As soon as it opened, the deformed teeth inside were sticky with rotten flesh and some dirty black liquid. There was a faint sense of viciousness. It hunched its back and raised its hands in front of its body into claws. Its legs stood up and bent slightly. Those dark eyes stared at Lin Xiao, and there was a strong sense of greed in them. It faced her in a hunting posture, as if it saw her as food. Lin Xiao sensed a strange aura from it, just like the aura of a human. Some strong people or people in high positions would have that kind of aura. Just like the zombie in front of her, its aura made Lin Xiao vaguely guess that it was a peak level 3 intelligent zombie. But why did this zombie attack her? Lin Xiao couldn't figure it out. She tried hard to search Lu Tianyu's memories in her mind. Only then did she realize that although this Lu Tianyu did all kinds of bad things in the base, but she had never seen a high-level zombie with her own eyes. In her memory, she only heard people talking about high-level zombies, and it seemed that they would attack low-level zombies. Then they would dig out the zombie cores to strengthen themselves. Lin Xiao then remembered that when she saved the unconscious man, it seemed that she had shaved off a zombie's head and a crystal-like thing fell out. After being held in her hand, it disappeared. Was it absorbed by her? No wonder. It seemed that this high-level zombie really treated her as prey. Was it trying to dig out the zombie cores in her brain? Lin Xiao narrowed her eyes slightly, although she was on guard. All the aura in her body was locked by this high-level zombie. As long as she moved, the other party would immediately pounce on her. She laughed in her heart. She was also an intelligent zombie. Although her aura was suppressed, she didn't have a strong sense of crisis. And even if she couldn't beat it, couldn't she run? If she couldn't run, she still had space. Could this monster even rush into his space? But Lin Xiao didn't know that she was only an early level 3 zombie. And the one in front of her was already at the peak of level 3 and was about to step into level 4. It targeted Lin Xiao because it wanted to use Lin Xiao's zombie core to evolve. If it used a zombie core of the same level as itself to evolve, it wouldn't be difficult to absorb it. But one disadvantage was that the energy wasn't very large, and it might not be able to break through its bottleneck to level 4. If it could find the zombie core of a level 4 zombie with abilities, then it would definitely be able to advance. But the strength of a level 4 zombie was not something that a level 3 zombie that hadn't activated its ability could covet. It was even more impossible to just randomly pick one up. So it had to take a step back and find level 3 intelligent zombies to make up the number. After all, many a little makes a mickle, and it might be able to break through. And it noticed that Lin Xiao was just a newly advanced level 3 zombie, and her energy seemed to be unstable. Chapter 19. Lin Xiao stared at the intelligent zombie alertly, and the intelligent zombie stared back at her. She noticed that there were no zombies around and it was a bit empty. She felt something strange in her heart just now, so it turned out to be here. They should have been either cleaned up or scared away by this highly intelligent zombie. Low-level zombies were instinctively afraid of high-level zombies. So as long as there was a high-level zombie nearby, if the other party didn't control itself, low-level zombies would subconsciously avoid it and run as far as possible. And this was an intelligent zombie with an IQ between 5 to 10 years old. And it already knew how to sneak attack. It seemed that its IQ wasn't low. Just as Lin Xiao was paying attention to the details of the surrounding environment, the intelligent zombie in front of her suddenly moved. It bent its legs and with a fierce kick, it instantly pounced towards Lin Xiao. Its speed was very fast, and in almost a fraction of a second, it rushed from a few meters away to in front of Lin Xiao. Both of its hands were shining with sharp nails, and it stabbed towards her. The claws of high-level zombies were very sharp and harder than diamond. Lin Xiao knew this, because she also had a pair of claws like this. Seeing that the opponent suddenly attacked and its speed was extremely fast, Lin Xiao only had time to lean to the side, and then she subconsciously punched out. She didn't have any instincts at this time, and subconsciously used the fighting skills that she often used before. But fortunately, her reaction was fast and because she was guarding against the opponent. So this punch immediately hit the side of the intelligent zombie's face. Boom! The intelligent zombie flew sideways. It fell heavily in the corner of the wall 7 or 8 meters away, and even rolled twice. The intelligent zombie rolled twice, and immediately bounced up to face Lin Xiao. Its hands were on the ground, and its hind legs were bent. Like a beast, it stared at her fiercely with its eyes. But in its fierce eyes, there was a flash of doubt at the same time. It was already stunned by Lin Xiao's punch. It clearly felt that Lin Xiao's strength wasn't strong, and her level wasn't higher than its. Logically speaking, she shouldn't be a match for it. But why did its attack not only fail, but also get hit by the opponent's punch? Roar, the intelligent zombie thought in its heart, but it let out a low growl from its mouth. Its voice was strange and unpleasant. There was a strong sense of suppression and warning in its voice, like a superior warning its subordinate. If you disobey orders, you will be punished. This kind of roar was only effective among zombies. If it was a zombie with a lower level than it, upon hearing this sound they were about to be terrified. They would either obediently submit or flee in panic. Therefore it was prepared to use this method to suppress Lin Xiao. However, Lin Xiao didn't seem to hear its roar and only looked at it quietly. Lin Xiao moved his fingers a few times. He was surprised that he was able to hit the zombie 7 to 8 meters away. Could it be that in addition to her powerful claws, she was also quite strong? Fortunately, his reaction wasn't any slower than this intelligent zombie. After this attack, he was able to react quickly. Lin Xiao was a little more confident in his own combat power. She looked at the intelligent zombie and suddenly laughed mockingly. Lin Xiao's roar was also low, but it was slightly higher than the intelligent zombie's voice. This was obviously a provocation. Damn it! Don't you want to bite me? Come on. If you have the ability, come and fight with me. Let's see how powerful you, a peak level 3 intelligent zombie, are. As expected when it heard Lin Xiao's roar. The intelligent zombie was annoyed. Because the provocation in Lin Xiao's voice was too obvious. It made this high-level zombie feel that its dignity was being violated. Roar! It roared fiercely, its 4 legs bent on the ground, and suddenly rushed towards Lin Xiao. Its speed was even faster than before. Lin Xiao looked at it pouncing towards her like a ferocious wild dog, and slightly pressed down on her legs. She saw that the zombie was rushing towards her, and with one last big leap, it pounced towards her from above. She lowered her body and slightly shifted her position. Taking advantage of the zombie flying over her head, she quickly reached out her hand. She grabbed both of the zombie's legs, and then forcefully pulled it back, slamming it to the ground in front of her. Puff dash, the sound of flesh hitting the ground was muffled. When the intelligent zombie flew over Lin Xiao's head, it didn't think that its legs would be caught. Then it felt its body's forward movement stop. And then it suddenly felt the sky and earth turn upside down. It was flung onto the hard floor with its back facing the ground. It felt its whole body shake, and its bones were about to fall apart. Lin Xiao was very strong, and this time she used 100% of her strength. Hearing the sound of the zombie hitting the ground, she knew that it was definitely not light. But she didn't stop because of this. In the next second, her 5 fingers bent, and pitch-black claws popped out from her fingertips. In an instant, it stabbed into the zombie's head. Roar! The intelligent zombie didn't even have time to roar, and half of its head had already been cut off by Lin Xiao. The turbid brain juice flowed all over the ground, and a green diamond-shaped crystal was mixed in the brain juice. It was the size of a finger. Zombie core. Lin Xiao already knew from Lu Tianyu's memory the level, color, and use of the zombie core. Because whether it was the zombie core, the beast core of a mutant beast, or the crystal core of a human, they could all be used to absorb the energy within. She felt that this was very similar to the settings in the apocalyptic novels on the internet. And the zombie cores here from low to high were white, transparent, gray, cyan, blue, yellow, orange, red, purple, and black. The zombie cores of ordinary zombies without levels were all white, and the highest level 9 super zombies were black. Lin Xiao scraped the intelligent zombie's brain with her sharp nails and scraped out the zombie core. Then she squeezed it in her hand. A hot temperature came from the zombie core, but Lin Xiao didn't care. Because then she felt the temperature turn into a warm current, spreading from her fingers to her body. Then the warm current walked around her body from head to toe, and finally returned to her mind. But the warm current didn't stop just like that, and there was a steady stream of warm current that continued to flow into her body. This feeling made Lin Xiao very comfortable. Wherever the warm current passed, it was as if it was being massaged. First, there was a burst of soreness, then a burst of comfort. It made her feel as if all the pores in her body had opened. A few minutes later, the green zombie core in her hand slowly turned small. Then it disappeared. After the warm current stopped, Lin Xiao let out a sigh of relief. After being nourished by this energy, she felt that her body seemed to have become lighter. The luster on her claws became brighter and flickered. With a thought, she put away her nails and clenched her fists. But she didn't feel anything about her strength. The zombie core was the source of energy, and the feeling of absorbing energy was extremely refreshing. No wonder these intelligent zombies would attack low-level zombies. At the same time, they loved human crystal cores even more. Chapter 20. The meat of human psychics was sweet and delicious, and the energy of the crystal core was also very pure. Unlike the zombie core, there were too many impurities. At the same time, humans also coveted the zombie core. Therefore, the most profitable job in the base was zombie hunting. He didn't expect that this level 3 zombie's combat power wasn't that high. Although it was simple and violent, the time was too short. Although the energy of the zombie core made her feel very comfortable, it didn't affect her hunger at all. She still wanted to eat. Want to eat meat. Want to eat meat. Want to eat meat. Lin Xiao shouted in her heart, but she only glanced at the corpse of the intelligent zombie, then turned and left. At this time, the sky was already slightly bright, and the sky was turning white. The surrounding images became clear. Although the color didn't change in Lin Xiao's eyes, the brightness could still change. After dealing with this intelligent zombie that came out of nowhere, Lin Xiao turned and continued to walk forward. She wanted to find a good car to use. Not long after she left, a few figures appeared next to the corpse of the intelligent zombie. They stared at the intelligent zombie lying on the ground with a look of surprise. Dead? How can this be? Lu Hongshi looked at the corpse on the ground in surprise and said. The other two didn't say anything, just looked at it with a sullen face. Lin Yong looked at it a few times, then pointed to the head of the intelligent zombie that was cut open and said, "It was killed by another intelligent zombie. The edges of the wound on the head are rough and uneven. It was obviously torn by hand. To be able to do this, only intelligent zombies above level 3 can do it." Liang Kaiyan also frowned slightly and nodded. Lu Hongshi stared at the corpse with a gloomy face and said, "We chased it for so long. I didn't expect it to be killed by another zombie. Wasting so much of our time." Lin Yong's face was also gloomy, but he didn't say anything. Liang Kaiyan asked doubtfully at this time, "There should only be one level 3 intelligent zombie in this area. Could it be that an outsider snatched its territory?" Every high-level zombie had domain awareness. They would find an unowned area and occupy it as their territory. If an external level 3 zombie wanted to live here for a long time, then it would have to drive away the original level 3 zombie. The law of the jungle, the most primitive law. Whoever was strong would stay, and whoever was weak would die. Therefore, if a lot of high-level zombies fight for territory, the result will always be that one of them will die. Of course, it didn't matter if he ran fast. However, if it was a higher-level zombie, then the original overlord would immediately run away. So there was no suspense at all. Lin Yong said, "This intelligent zombie doesn't have any energy damage on it, and there are no traces around it. The opponent should not be a mutant zombie, but a level 3 intelligent zombie. But to be able to slice off its skull so cleanly, that's a little strange." The other two looked around. Sure enough, there were no signs of damage caused by the energy of the ability. Moreover, this intelligent zombie didn't have any other wounds on its body, so it was directly killed. If it wasn't a mutant zombie, a level 3 zombie wouldn't be able to do this. Moreover, the one in front of him was an intelligent zombie that was about to break through to level 4. His strength was close to that of a level 4. He just didn't have the ability to use his special ability. However, it was impossible for him to be killed so easily by an intelligent zombie of the same level. Liang Kaiyan thought of a possibility and said hesitantly, "Could it be a level 4 physical mutant zombie?" Lin Yong nodded with a serious expression. Lu Hongshi was a little shocked and said, "What? Level 4? We've been here for so long, and we've never heard of a level 4 mutant zombie appearing here. Could it be a mistake?" Liang Kaiyan glanced at him and said, "Then do you think an intelligent zombie of the same level could kill it so cleanly? Even if there really was a level 3 zombie that could kill it, it would be impossible without a big battle. But look around, there are no traces at all. Does it look like there was a big fight?" Lu Hongshi was speechless. Yes, if it wasn't a level 4 zombie. What kind of level 3 zombie could kill a zombie that was about to reach level 4 in such a clean manner? He said unwillingly. Then what do we do now? Continue to chase that level 4 zombie? As soon as Lu Hongshi said this, the other two's faces turned black. They had locked onto this zombie and had been chasing it for a month. They didn't expect it to benefit other zombies in the end. They were so aggrieved that they wanted to vomit blood. But with their current strength, they weren't a match for a level 4 zombie. Don't look down on them because there were 2 level 3 mutants and 1 level 4 mutant. But in front of a zombie of the same level, they couldn't resist at all. Zombie speed and strength were things that humans didn't have. And zombies had beast-like instincts. If it was an ordinary mutant, 3 of them together wouldn't even be enough to cut off the head of a high-level zombie. On the other side, there were a lot of abandoned cars along the way, but Lin Xiao tried a lot of them. She almost couldn't start them. After going back for a long time, she couldn't find a car. She couldn't find food and she couldn't find a car. Lin Xiao couldn't help feeling a little depressed. Suddenly, she remembered the rabbit in the space. Oh yes, she still had to go see if the rabbit was poisoned to death. Thinking of this, she immediately dodged and entered the space. As soon as she entered the space, Lin Xiao looked around. There was no sign of Wu Yueling, but with a sniff, she immediately knew the position of the child. So she walked into the bushes. But she didn't go in the direction of Wu Yueling, but in the direction of the rabbit. In fact, she didn't need to use her nose to smell because in this space. She didn't know why, but she had a faint premonition. Like a sixth sense or something especially strong. Feeling where Wu Yueling was, she used her nose to sniff. Sure enough, she was over there. She could faintly feel the little rabbit and the few little mice that didn't open their eyes. But the feeling of the little mice was very weak. If she didn't carefully feel it, almost all of them would be ignored. These few little mice also had strong vitality. After being left here for so long, they didn't starve to death. Lin Xiao thought if there was really nothing to eat, she would use these few little things that hadn't grown hair to have a sumptuous meal. She quietly walked to the place where the little rabbit was, and saw that the rabbit was actually digging a hole. Not dead. That meant those strawberries could be eaten. Lin Xiao was in a good mood as she watched the little rabbit bend its body and use its 2 front paws to dig a hole. Lin Xiao was sure that the rabbit must have dug more than one hole. The little rabbit that was focused on digging still didn't notice the zombies behind it. Lin Xiao watched for a while, then felt relieved. She stood up and walked in the direction of Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling was by the lake, lying on the edge of the grass in a somewhat hidden open space, curled up into a ball. Using a blanket to wrap herself up, she closed her eyes and slept. Lin Xiao saw that her side was filled with the little toys that she had made with grass before, and her stiff face slightly smiled. But she didn't see how strange her smile was. After she glanced at Wu Yueling, she turned around and left the space in a flash. Appearing in her original position, she immediately rushed to the strawberry field. Chapter 21. She didn't know that the intelligent zombie she had killed before was being hunted. She didn't know that she had killed someone else's prey. She only knew that level 3 zombie's corpse core to her probably doesn't have much of an effect, right? Except for the comfortable feeling when she absorbed energy. Anyway, she didn't feel anything. She didn't know why those high-level zombies like to absorb other people's corpse cores. Lin Xiao quickly ran to the strawberry field. It wasn't far anyway, and her speed had increased a lot. She ran like a gust of wind, and only a zombie like her dared to run on the road so blatantly. Since it was daytime, the other zombies were all walking slowly. But she ran like a gust of wind. Wasn't that telling others that there was a high-level zombie here? After all, other high-level zombies already had a sense of crisis and were afraid of being hunted by humans. So they all hid. But Lin Xiao didn't care about this, because she hadn't deeply experienced the fact that she was a zombie yet. And her character sometimes lacked a brain. She wouldn't think so much. So she was soon targeted. Huh. Fuck. Come quickly. A high-level zombie. A small group of zombie hunters was resting on the 3rd floor of a building. One of them sat by the window and looked down at the road below. A silhouette dashed past, leaving behind a trail of smoke. That speed was like driving a sports car. The man sitting by the window took a look. He didn't see Lin Xiao's face clearly. He just saw a back. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared. He jumped up instantly. In the post-apocalyptic world, most people would come out in groups. They would either follow a group of zombie hunters or the regular zombie hunters in the base. Absolutely no one dared to act alone. Even a high-level psychic wouldn't dare to act alone. Because no matter how powerful your ability was, there would be a time when your energy would run out. But zombies were everywhere. As long as there was a living person, they would gather and surround you. Although they moved slowly, if there were a lot of them, they would slowly exhaust the psychic to death. Because as long as zombies smelled the scent of a living person, they would be like a pack of wolves that saw meat. They would fearlessly pounce and pounce. Where is he? The others immediately rushed over when they heard it was a high-level zombie. They squeezed out of the window and looked out, but they couldn't see anything. The first young man who saw Lin Xiao pushed them away. He supported himself with his hand and jumped down from the window on the 3rd floor. Stop talking nonsense. If you don't chase him, he will run away. Huang Xiao jumped down from the window and rolled on the ground. Then he quickly jumped up and chased after Lin Xiao. Huang Xiao! Xie Dong called out with a frown when he saw Huang Xiao chasing after him so rashly. The others saw him jump down and retreated. Then they all rushed out and ran down from the 2nd floor. A few of the more agile ones directly flipped down from the 2nd floor. A few agile people jumped down from the 2nd floor. The group of people followed Huang Xiao and chased after Lin Xiao like wolves who had seen meat. Xie Dong followed behind these people. Although his expression was calm, the frown on his face made people feel that he was very angry. Xie Dong was following them. Although he looked calm, the frown on his face made people feel that he was angry. The food in the base was no longer in short supply. After all, there were still some plant ability users who could identify and grow plants. Although the soil in the base could not be compared to before the apocalypse, there was still a shortage of food. As long as they could eat their fill and not starve to death, it was enough. As long as they could eat their fill and not starve to death, it was enough. The materials left behind before the apocalypse had been used up in the past few years. There was less and less rice and flour. Only the high-ranking officers of the base could afford to eat these, while the other survivors in the base couldn't afford to eat them. Ordinary people could only get a hard bun and a small bottle of water every day. These two things could only be eaten for a day. The accommodation was also divided into different levels. Those without ability, power, or connections could only live in a big tent. A big tent had dozens or hundreds of people living in it. It was very crowded and messy. Only those who had ability and managers could live in it. Only those who could afford to live in luxurious accommodation such as a single room in the base. Moreover, the weather had changed after the apocalypse. It was as hot as the college entrance examination during the day and cold at night. The temperature difference between day and night was huge. During the day, it was 40 to 50 degrees. The coldest time at night was more than 10 degrees. Although it was not enough to freeze people to death, it was still very cold. If they wanted to eat better, they would take on missions and leave the base to adventure. Only when they brought back something valuable could they exchange for better food and accommodation. Of course, if it was a high-level zombies core, it would be very precious. There was no requirement for the number of people who wanted to leave the base. The base did not care about this. They could let one person go or even 100 people go. It was very casual. They just had to make a record of their entry and exit. Especially those who came back, they had to go through strict checks to see if they had brought back any viruses. And those who went out were mainly to hunt zombies for their cores. Zombie cores could enhance the energy of human crystal cores, which were the energy of ability cores. Therefore, powerful ability users were the main fighting force against zombies. Therefore, in order to become stronger, these ability users would go out to hunt high-level zombies, or buy zombie cores from other people in the base. In the team that was chasing Lin Xiao besides Huang Xiao, who was a peak level 3 ability user, there was also a level 4 ability user, Xie Dong. The others were just level 2 and level 1 cannon fodder. That's right. In the post-apocalyptic world, the weak needed to rely on the strong to survive. And in order to save energy, the strong liked to keep some cannon fodder to protect themselves. Huang Xiao was the temporary vice-captain of this team. In terms of strength, he was the second strongest with a level 3 wind ability user. The first strongest was Xie Dong. Xie Dong was a level 4 fire ability user, and he was a special forces soldier before the apocalypse. Therefore, it was natural for him to be the captain. Moreover, he had good facial features, coupled with the strict temperament of a soldier. It made him look very serious and unapproachable. And because of his outstanding ability, when everyone was together, he was the one who made the decisions. The others could only listen. It was fine if they did not listen, he did not care if they lived or died. If they did not listen, no one would be responsible if they died outside. But there was one person who did not think so. Huang Xiao was the first to jump down from the third floor, and he used his wind ability. In an instant he chased after Lin Xiao far away. Xiedong wanted to call out to him, but he could not. He could only suppress his anger and follow behind everyone. The zombie cores of high-level zombies were very precious, but do not forget the combat power and intelligence of high-level zombies. It was very difficult for zombies to level up in the post-apocalyptic world, and their development was very slow. Therefore, high-level zombies were very rare. But if a level 3 zombie core could be exchanged for a bag of white flour, a level 4 zombie core could be exchanged for a bag of rice, 5 good quilts, and a few sets of clean clothes. There were too many people who wanted to kill high-level zombies in exchange for these things. Chapter 22. Xiedong frowned because he was not sure what level the advanced zombie that Huang Xiao saw was. If it was level 4, then it would be troublesome. Even though level 4 mutant zombies were extremely rare, they were extremely rare. And level 5 zombie leaders had only appeared 3 in the past 2 years. And they were all abnormally strong, basically all those who encountered them were dead. Now they could only find level 3 or 4 advanced zombies at most, but level 3 intelligent zombies were quite common. But with the strength of their team, if they encountered a level 4 zombie, they would not be so happy. And at this time, Lin Xiao suddenly felt the smell of people coming from behind. She knew that there was a small team of humans nearby when she ran past. Because she smelled the smell of living people from afar, but she did not care about it. She just did not provoke the other party. But she did not expect that she did not provoke these people. These people wanted to provoke her instead. Lin Xiao suddenly stopped, turned around and quietly looked at the human who was chasing behind. This person was very fast. Lin Xiao felt the fluctuation of his ability. Looking at his light footsteps and extremely fast speed, she had already guessed that the other party was a wind ability user. When Huang Xiao saw that the zombie in front of him suddenly stopped, he immediately felt happy. He rushed to a position about 20 meters away from Lin Xiao and stopped, his eyes tightly staring at the female zombie, looking her up and down. The zombie in front of him had messy hair, but it was very clean. The appearance of the face had been ruined. A large tear covered the whole face, completely unable to see the original appearance. A pair of dark eyes unique to advanced zombies, tightly pursed white lips. She was wearing a loose long dress, and her figure could not be seen clearly. She was standing there straight. Her eyes looked at him calmly. This made Huang Xiao feel very strange. This female zombie did not fiercely rush towards him. Nor did she look like she wanted to attack him. Not even the other party's claws were stretched out. It must be known that when humans hunt for advanced zombies also hunt for ability users like them. But usually they act in groups. A level 3 intelligent zombie wanted to deal with a few ability users at the same time. The chances of success were too low. At this time he was only one person. Because of his special ability, he had already left the team behind him a few streets away. His teammates hadn't caught up yet, so he was alone. For the high-level zombie in front of him, this is the best time to attack. If it were other zombies, they would have already rushed over. Therefore, Huang Xiao left a gap of nearly 20 meters to adapt to the situation. However, the one in front of him didn't attack him hungrily like he had imagined. It just stood there calmly and looked at him quietly. Because he hadn't fought yet, he didn't know whether the female zombie was level 3 or 4. But judging from the speed at which he was chasing the zombie, it should only be a level 3 zombie, not a level 4 one. Lin Xiao quietly looked at the man in front of him for a while. He knew that the man was obviously waiting for his accomplice, and had no intention of attacking immediately. She could sense some of the man's thoughts, even though she was a little far away. His thoughts weren't very clear, but she could still sense it. Lin Ji was a little unwilling to wait with him, so he turned around. Suddenly, he ran in the direction he was originally running. Stop! Huang Xiao saw that the female zombie in front of him actually turned around and ran, and immediately shouted subconsciously. He fiercely rushed towards her. With his wind ability supporting his feet, he waved his hands at the same time. A gust of wind blades quickly cut towards Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao sensed Huang Xiao's attack with his keen senses. She nimbly dodged a few times, her body jumped up, twisted a few times in the air, then did a somersault and landed nimbly. Huang Xiao's dozens of wind blades were all dodged by her. Not even a corner of her clothes was touched. Being suddenly attacked, Lin Xiao's temper also came out. Motherfucker! Do you think zombies are easy to bully? See how this old lady will cut you up. Only you know how to cut people up. With a flick of her fingernails, Lin Xiao bent down, stomped her feet, and fiercely rushed towards Huang Xiao. Her speed was very fast, and in just a flash she rushed in front of Huang Xiao. Because of the chase just now, Huang Xiao had accidentally closed the distance between him and Lin Xiao. Seeing that this female zombie only nimbly dodged a few times and easily dodged all of his wind blades, he was slightly surprised in his heart. He saw that after this female zombie landed, her body suddenly jumped and turned into a human figure that fiercely jumped towards him, and in the blink of an eye she was in front of him. Not good. Huang Xiao immediately felt that something was wrong, and the sense of crisis in his heart suddenly rose. He immediately reacted and wanted to retreat. But in a moment of desperation, he forgot to use his wind ability to support his speed, and only had time to set up a wind wall around his body. But his wind wall didn't last for 2 seconds, and was pierced by the other party's claws. Then before he could react, he felt his body being hit a few times. Then he was sent flying with a kick. After Huang Xiao was kicked flying, he rolled a few times on the ground. He sat up and subconsciously rubbed his hands on both sides of his arms, and immediately checked his body with some alarm. He wanted to see if he was scratched by the female zombie's claws. If he was scratched, then he wouldn't be able to escape the fate of becoming a zombie. After looking again, he found that the skin on his body didn't have any scratches. The most painful part of his body was the one that was kicked in the stomach. No, there was no wound. That's great. Huang Xiao couldn't believe it and jumped up. He was ready to check his body again to see if he really wasn't scratched by the zombie. Suddenly his body felt cold. Then he saw a piece of torn cloth at his feet. Then he looked at himself, there was a piece of flesh. Huang Xiao. Fuck. He subconsciously clamped his legs, and his hands fiercely covered the area below his abdomen. Huang Xiao raised his head with a dumbfounded face and looked around. In the end he didn't see a single zombie, but saw his teammates who were rushing over. Fuck! Huang Xiao, what's the situation? Everyone saw Huang Xiao standing there naked, and they were all dumbfounded. One of them couldn't help but laugh and blurted out, Huang Xiao. Fuck! I really want to find a hole to hide in. Xiedong's expression was a little strange, and he lightly clenched his fist to his mouth, and coughed dryly, cough. Who's that? Lend Huang Xiao a piece of clothing first. Don't just laugh. As he spoke, he moved his face to the side, and his face was full of awkwardness. Only then did everyone react, and one of them took off his extra jacket, and threw it to Huang Xiao with a smile. Huang Xiao, are you being teased by someone?